Chapter 445. As one of the most ancient demon lords and one of the most powerful existences in the Chaos faction and even the entire multiverse, the Lord of Putrefaction Ladvioka had carried out the most basic duty of a demon countless times in the past: conquest and slaughter. As an existence at the top of the demon food chain, it was quite rare for him to appear in the mortal plane. That was because unless the dimensional will was blind, any dimension would reject such a mega dangerous item. And whenever he appeared in the mortal plane, dimensional conquest would become dimensional destruction, and slaughter would become the annihilation of species or even living creatures. Over the long years, he had already lost count of how many dimensions he had conquered and destroyed. He had even successfully turned it into an art of destruction that only demons could appreciate. Although directly tearing apart those little bugs and enjoying the slaughter and blood is something delightful, plagues and diseases can also achieve our goals. The former requires an entire demon army, while the latter only requires a small mouse that carries the plague and virus. My only regret is that I won't be able to hear those pitiful bugs' screams and despair. That's why I always bring some souls back to play with them and ask them how they happily die. Judging from how efficiently he slaughtered and spread despair, this demon lord who didn't have much of a reputation was doubtlessly far superior to his peers. When the entire mortal plane was screaming and dying, the mortal plane's dimensional laws that had already reached the brink of despair were naturally unable to stop Ladvioka from entering. When he joyfully harvested the souls that died in despair, he would always feel the joy of a farmer obtaining a great harvest after a year of hard work. Oh, don't look at me like that. I'm just a good inner demon that just happened to pass by. It's such a pity to waste so many delicious souls. I'm just a hard-working and kind farmer. As for accusing me of spreading plagues and viruses, do you see that? I'm just very sensitive to the fact that the mortal plane is approaching the apocalypse. Yep, not only am I a good farmer, I'm also a very sensitive and hard-working janitor. Even though no one dared to criticize him, he would always say such things and tell unnecessary lies. This was his personal favorite method of entertainment. But this time, Ladvioka, who had experienced so much destruction, was quite astonished. With his abilities, of course he wouldn't treat this black mist as a so-called poison. This wasn't the first time that he had been expelled from the mortal plane, but only the dead are allowed to exist. This is the first time I've seen such an unfriendly dimensional law. Even the undead lord's undead plane doesn't reject the existence of living beings, just because the environment isn't suitable for living beings. This is directly leading all life to become the dead. Without the living, how can the plane survive? What's the point of existence? Unlike what others knew, the Chaos main god Ladvioka's mind wasn't only filled with destruction and slaughter. He was quite interested in the meaning of life's existence, the philosophy of life, and so on. In fact, he even had the title of a philosopher and historian in the mortal plane. And in the Chaos Abyss, the unique dimensional territories he controlled were his most successful experiments. There are successful people and there are unsuccessful people. Of course, demons didn't know how to create. Ladvioka's favorite method was to destroy a plane's resistance and living beings, and then implant new dimensional laws into it. Some would be stolen from other planes, some would be the demon's twisted and chaotic will of the Chaos Abyss, and some would be Ladvioka's own wondrous ideas. He would then spread these ideas and extrapolate them to see what kind of creatures would appear and what kind of results would appear. Everyone believed that Ladvioka was only a Chaos main god who controlled 4 dimensions, and that he was inconceivably low-key compared to other main god-level demons. But they didn't know that Ladvioka already had several hundred-dimensional experimental plots. He was truly a farmer who worked day and night. As a demon, he's actually playing the role of a god. Is he insane? All demons are insane. The more powerful a demon noble, the crazier they'll be. Do you intend to use logic and common sense to understand what they're doing? However, don't count on Ladvioka to be a benevolent creator. The distorted dimensional laws would most likely create the most twisted of creations. Creatures that breathed poison and ate plagues as food, even if they had gentle, kind hearts and beautiful appearances, would still become the creators of death in the end. And so, the powerful demon Marquis Ladvioka developed the hobby of being an animal breeder. Although most of the time, he would end up destroying his own creations and dimensions, countless years of accumulation gave him many beloved pets. At the very least, the 9th to 13th levels of the Chaos Abyss that Ladvioka resided in were filled with all sorts of twisted lifeforms. Even demons didn't dare to enter the most dangerous levels of the Chaos Abyss. And now, Ladvioka was quite astonished to discover the netherworld aura that brought about death. He was pondering and pondering why the dimensional laws of this newly born dimensional egg would be so strange. Why would it use death as the foundation for creating souls? Could it be that only the dead were allowed to exist in this dimension? In that case, how could Ladvioka create a dimensional cycle with a conscience? And the dimensional laws of this dimensional egg were also quite strange. The other dimensions were supposed to be more complex and difficult to understand, so why? Mine. They're all mine. Alright then, after pondering for about a second and a half, Ladvioka decided to let his instincts as a demon have the upper hand. No matter if he could understand or not, he would steal this dimensional egg first. If he really couldn't understand, he would destroy this dimensional egg with his own hand. Idiots, get out of my way. But when Ladvioka decided to go all out to steal this dimensional egg, an astonishing stench began to spread around him. Even the demons that were constantly retreating didn't have time to react before they clutched their throats and collapsed to the ground. Even the demons that were far away from Ladvioka were instantly knocked over by the sudden explosion of poison in their bodies. Come out, my children. It's time to enjoy a feast. After casually killing the cannon fodder and emptying the dimensional space and summoning slots, over 100 dimensional doors were opened this time. War. A headless war elephant demon walked out of the dimensional door. Where its head should have been, there were twisted tentacles instead. Its gigantic body was as large as a mountain, and it was covered in black dragon-like scales. A purgatory giant that couldn't dodge in time was directly stomped to death, and then, over 300 of these war elephants rushed out at once. A rotten angel door was opened, and a one-winged angel army walked out. Although these angels weren't as cold as the angels in the sky, their rotten facial features, exposed livers, and wings that had been bitten off by magical insects were even more frightening. When these angels suddenly opened their eyes, they revealed compound eyes similar to those of insects. Twisted magical insects could be seen crawling in their ears and pupils. Some one-winged angels directly ignored their little companions, while others directly tore off their wings and threw them into their mouths and swallowed them whole. A small door that was only wide enough for a dwarf to pass through opened, and a seemingly pure and flawless white-haired girl was pushed out. Her entire body was bound tightly in chains, and her eyes were sewn shut with threads. Her bright red lips were stuffed with a gag. When the mystical magical beasts saw her, even the gigantic beasts that covered the skies unhesitatingly ran away. The slower ones would mysteriously self-destruct, and their corpses would be covered in strange mushrooms and plants. Then, countless little bees would fly out from the mushrooms and search for new nutrients for their mother. Yet another dimensional door was opened. This time, even more terrifying demons walked out. One by one, the planar gates opened, and completely unreasonable existences walked out. An inexplicable fear swept through the entire area. Even the master gods of chaos had to use their full strength. This was the most troublesome part of fighting a demon. No one knew when it would go crazy. The powerful existence's own twisted natural laws were more than enough to resist against the immature natural laws of death. When these otherworldly creatures appeared in the sky, all life here met their doom. This is a chaos main god. I inhaled sharply at the sight before me. Originally, I already had many guesses and countermeasures against the highest level combat strength in the multiverse. But only when I truly faced one did I realize that just their very existence far surpassed the limits of any mortal's understanding. Yes, this is a chaos main god level demon, a demon among demons, an existence hated by the entire multiverse. Although I don't know why he suddenly brought out his true power, let me have a taste of this old friend of mine. The Lord of Lies nodded and took off his hat in a gentlemanly salute. He intended to directly enter the battlefield. To him, this desperate situation was nothing more than a normal afternoon tea after the battle. After all, he was one of the chaos main gods, and his power level was even higher than that of the insane Lord of Putrefaction. Wait a moment, leave this guy to me. As the commander of the battlefield, I made the first decision and snatched the opponent. This demon vanguard who suddenly went insane would be left to me. Is that all right? This doubtlessly wasn't a doubt of my personal abilities. I could understand. After all, I had only accumulated more than 300 years of experience, and yet I wanted to challenge a Chaos main god who knew how old he was. No matter how I looked at it, this would be suicidal. But in my strategic thinking, this was indeed the best choice. Of course, I'll leave the Chaos War god to you. He's even less compatible with me. No, I should say that he's the enemy I don't want to face the most. That's right. Let's not talk about Cavendish, whose stats and goals were unknown. The god of holy light, who obviously intended to take advantage of the situation, could also be put aside for now. According to the relevant records, the Chaos War god Donates was a general-type individual who was skilled at single-handedly killing the enemy leader. It was said that he was the best at direct frontal assaults in the entire mortal plane. Compared to me, who was more of an army type, he was the worst. I didn't want to know how this best frontal assaults came about at all. Not only that, his fallen Valkyrie army had already been judged dead by the dimensional laws of this world. It would be completely useless. Death magic had always been quite ineffective against the Valkyrie army. If Donates brought his army to attack me and destroy the location of the ritual, I really wouldn't be able to do anything about it. That was why I had my strongest Liege of Lies deal with this troublesome opponent. Although the Lord of Putrefaction Ladvioka was also inconceivably powerful, at the very least, his most powerful poisons and plagues would be ineffective against my undead army. I was used to fighting as an army, so I never feared an army-type enemy. I had the advantage in terms of compatibility. At least, I had an advantage over Donates. I had enough of the unreasonable heroes and war gods. It wasn't that Camillus hadn't thought this through. He also knew that this was the best choice. However, he was worried that I would easily be killed off by Ladvioka, which would ruin the situation. Now that he saw how determined I was, he nodded and vanished into the void. Long time no see. The last time we met was 3,200 years ago, wasn't it? The war god who enjoyed being a dog. The Devil Lord blocked the Chaos War god's path. His angel army was circling in midair. Their opponent was an army of immemorial devils. The difference in numbers caused the god of Holy Light's incarnation to choose to observe. In a corner of the battlefield, a certain person was still heartlessly cooking fish soup. However, he was selectively ignored by everyone else. My army had already assembled, and the horn of death had been blown. The undead army and the venomous magical beasts were about to meet. Right now, it was time for me and Ladvioka's battle. An army battle? A competition of creation? Whose children are stronger? Who's afraid of whom? Chapter 446. Is it time yet? A putrid wind brought with it a foul stench. The demon army, which was synonymous with destruction, had already spread out in full force. Their overwhelming military presence gave us endless pressure. Here, demons from many dimensions were gathered together. Here, even a small soldier had surpassed the definition of a so-called brave and strong individual by any mortal's definition. Meanwhile, their opponents were the endless, silent night. There was no need for any adjectives to describe the warriors of the night as brave and loyal. I knew that no matter where or when it was, wherever my sword pointed, that would be the target of their charge. Who would their opponents be? How strong would they be? What were our chances of victory? They never asked. When the horn to charge sounded, the silent sound of horse hooves would be the knight's choice. As for me, in order to respond to their loyalty and expectations, I would do everything in my power to lead them to victory. It's time. The silver book on my arm opened up, and countless secrets transformed into actual mysterious runes that flew in the sky. Pure order received a new interpretation, and the light of my god equipment illuminated the entire world. Original Codex. Give judgment to the sinners before you. Forbidden spell. Great judgment. There wasn't even a need for judgment. Every demon and magical creature from another dimension was an uncountable number of villains. Dimensional invasion and destruction were judged, and the illusory silver light transformed into actual restraints on their bodies. However, for these top-level dimensional destroyers, such large-scale restraints were rather weak. The restraints only lasted for a few seconds before they were able to break free. However, I had already achieved my goal. Within the range of the forbidden spell, Great Judgment, as a Law Job class member, my power level was forcefully increased by 1 rank, from Legend to Saint rank. For ordinary powerful individuals, the increase from Legend to Saint rank wouldn't be that great. However, for me and my army, whether or not I could reach Saint rank was a completely different concept. I closed my eyes, and the familiar icy plains appeared in front of me again. When I opened my eyes again, the entire world had changed. The burning ruined city was right in front of me, a place that I could see but could never reach. Even if the enemies were even stronger than before, our warriors still didn't stop fighting. War drums resounded, and battle flags fluttered in the wind. The knight who was bathed in fresh blood still hadn't given up hope. The icy plains extended outwards, and snow began to fall from the sky. The scene from that day reappeared. The infallible defender. The charging skeleton knight crossed this land of ice and snow, but he once again possessed a living body. That Valkyrie body allowed him to recover to the peak state of his life. No, he was even stronger than when he was at his peak. I extended my hand and let the snowflake melt on my palm. The familiar cold air lifted my spirits. However, I didn't have the time to reminisce. I clenched my fist and let the snowflake fly with the wind. It's not enough. Yes, against the endless demon army of main god-level demons, even the Valkyrie army of legendary-level demons wouldn't be enough. He opened the book again, but this time, it was not the divine artifact grimoire. It was a somewhat old notebook, and on it, there were steps and preparations for such a plan. On the page that I flipped to, there was a row of golden subbodies that were emitting radiance. Allow my personal power level to reach legendary level. With the divine artifact grimoire's support, I'll reach Saint rank. This is all for a new soul world. Yes, from the very start, I didn't have Aisha's unreasonable divine power and strength. She was capable of casually distorting the 4 elements and having them create a new world according to her will. And if I wanted to create a new world, even if I had the theoretical and technical knowledge, it would be like using a shovel and bricks to create an entire world. It would be basically impossible. Even if I could do it, I wouldn't have the time. Fortunately, there was still a method in this world that could create a new world with one's will. Yes, that was the special ability of Saint rank and above, a soul world. A soul world was the ultimate creation of mortals' thoughts and stubbornness. A soul world was the creator's most desired ideal and obsession. A soul world was a land of dreams that had been distorted in the real world. A soul world was the only way to save the world. In front of me, the snow-white land of falling snow began to distort. The familiar castle began to collapse, and the heroic knight transformed back into bones. Defender still fell in the end. The charging knight stared blankly at the scene before them. They didn't know what had happened. Some even dropped their weapons and battle flags in astonishment. The Devil Army naturally launched a counterattack at this moment. I also realized that the world before me was collapsing. I felt a mysterious pain in my heart that made me forget to breathe. But when I saw the confused knight before me, all of this transformed into an angry roar that echoed throughout the battlefield. Defender has indeed fallen, but, my knight, our battle has yet to end. We admit that we lost, but so what if we lost? We've long since been defeated. We've already lost the people that we longed to protect. I knew that the reason why we were undefeatable in this soul world was because all the night souls, including myself, were watching the eternally burning city. It was as if our families and homes were still behind us, giving us endless power to protect them. But, it's time to wake up from this dream. The country and people that we swore to protect have already died a long time ago. The collapsing Defender's old city was the most painful annotation. The collapsing bricks stole their will to fight. My angry roar caused me great pain, and hurting my loyal knight souls made my heart bleed. But even if we've lost, we still haven't lost a place to return to. Think about the Northlands. Think about why the descendants of us bastards would go to such a messy wasteland. Why would they be willing to do anything to clean up the mess for us useless things? The silent night souls saw the people of the mist who had traveled thousands of kilometers to return to their homes. They saw the holy city of Defender, which was glowing brightly once more. They saw the people of the mist reconstructing their lives in the frigid winter lands. They saw themselves and their adopted children creating a new family, and their children who desired a better future. They clenched their fists, picked up the weapons that had fallen to the ground, and waved their battle flags in the sky once more. The skeleton night souls would never fear a powerful opponent. They were only afraid that they had no family to protect. All they needed was a goal to protect. Yes, we've lost in the past. But this time, we definitely won't lose. Soul imprints were able to surpass the limit of one soul imprint per person. That was because soul imprints were a summary of everyone's life's experiences and paths. I had many lives, so of course I had many paths. However, a soul world would be a person's most stubborn fantasy world. In fact, they would be stubborn to the point that they would be dragged back to reality from their dreams. That was why, in order to not lose in the future, the dreams of the past, there won't be a future if we only wallow in the past. Now that the battle to win the future is right before us, it's time to wake up from our dreams. And this time, we definitely won't lose. We have nowhere to retreat to. We definitely won't lose. Our families are behind us. We definitely won't lose. We carry hope on our shoulders. We definitely won't lose. We will fight against the gods for the sake of all living beings. We definitely won't lose. The iron will of the defeated army resonated with me. Their stubborn desire to create a new future broke through reality once again. I knew that those brave and loyal night souls would forever trust in me. They had entrusted everything to me. And what was unfolding before me was a new world, a world of dreams that was determined to break through the future. This is the country of the dead. Those loyal and sincere night souls are Valkyrie's protectors. They should have true eternal life, even if it's only a dream made of ice and snow. The snow that had stopped falling began once more. The ground began to freeze over. Behind me, a white tower that represented ice and snow slowly rose up. In this incomplete world, after death became the foundation of the soul, a new elemental foundation was created, the ice and snow of life. In this country of the dead should also have physical bodies and a life limited to this world. Bodies of ice and snow shall give their souls physical bodies. Ice and snow fell on the skeletons, forming new physical bodies. Unlike Valkyrie's bodies, which were made of energy that wouldn't tire, this time, although their bodies were made of ice and snow, they still had their skin, muscles, and organs intact. They could feel true pain and happiness that they hadn't felt in a long time. They had obtained descendants and could feel the feeling of life. In fact, they could even improve and evolve. That's right, this was life. This wasn't some mystical illusion or temporary modification. The boundary between life and death had been broken. In this country of the dead, souls would be placed in bodies of ice and snow. Sinners would be punished in hell. How could they not have physical bodies? Bodies made of ice and snow would give them new life, a life that could only exist in hell. And right now, these bodies of ice and snow were the first to give my night souls new life. Did they seem familiar? Of course, my interaction with the frigid nightmares allowed me to learn the secrets of ice and snow creatures. Their very existence was the best template. The frigid nightmares, the soul creatures native to the Northlands, would be able to obtain countless of their own kind in hell. No, considering the frigid nightmares' outstanding ability to evolve, they should be the evolved form of the frigid nightmares. Right now, bodies made of ice and snow would make the revived night souls even stronger. However, this wasn't the only thing that made the demons afraid. Why won't they die? Impossible. Their bodies and souls have already been destroyed, so how can they be revived? The beheaded night souls would still be able to fight after their heads were retrieved. Even if their souls and physical bodies were sliced into pieces, they would be able to instantly recover. The reason? In hell, how could the dead who hadn't been judged and punished by hell be able to die? This was the reason why this world existed. It was the foundational rule that surpassed everything else. But here, at this moment, this foundational rule was the strongest undying property in the entire universe. A new life gave them the possibility of growth and improvement. Defeat in one battle. 2 defeats. That didn't matter. These night souls were already used to defeat. They would grow and evolve through defeat. They would eventually become the nightmares of any enemy, even if that would take several hundred, several thousand, or even several tens of thousands of years. We protect the future and hope. We absolutely cannot be defeated. That's right, at the very least, we definitely wouldn't be defeated this time. You are far too dangerous. This sudden declaration came from the Chaos War god Denotes. Denotes had been silent all this time as he represented the will of chaos. However, he had been secretly evaluating how dangerous I was. But now, he made his own judgment. Although you aren't strong, your thoughts and will are far too dangerous. I, Denotes, believe that you are the most dangerous existence in the world. So, die. Denotes was the most loyal warrior of the will of chaos. He was a man of few words. Everyone he was determined to kill had already died. However, I didn't intend to respond to his declaration that I would kill him at all costs. I simply lightly touched the crystal skeleton in my hand and repeated a single sentence. Ale, do you see it? It's time. Chapter 447. On the Ottoman Empire's battlefield, sunlight once again broke through the dark clouds. When the new sun shone down, the battlefield was filled with cheers. The seemingly hopeless rainstorm had stopped, and the water that had flooded the capital finally dispersed. When the evil god's worshippers could no longer hear the main god's call, the sea folk fled even faster than expected. The mortal warriors threw their weapons into the sky, lying in the water covered in mud, enjoying the happiness of survival. In the towns around the new king's city, old men trembled as they walked out of their old houses. They raised their heads and looked at the sunlight that they had not seen for years. The joy of victory filled everyone's heart. Although the mortals had won this battle, it was likely that nobody would ask why the dark clouds had dispersed so quickly, or why the sea folk's worshippers and divine mags had suddenly lost their power. Our king. It was Emperor Dasos who guided us to victory. Battleships bearing the royal insignia slowly floated through the sky after the rain. These battleships were still charred and damaged, but they became synonyms for meritorious deeds and epic victories. Mortals would only know that their emperor, the young Dasos, had guided them to reclaim their capital. At this moment, his reputation was destined to surpass that of all previous kings. And in a corner of the battlefield, the true hero of this battle was preparing to reap the rewards of this battle, the true gods who had become his spoils of war. Is it time? Even though Ale was by the quagmire, his white robe was still untainted by even a speck of dust. However, a blue-skinned female giant was lying beside him. Since she was already close to death, her previous insanity had dissipated. Her expression, which was always filled with anger and dissatisfaction, had calmed down, and now even contained a hint of ambition and beauty. TSK, TSK, TSK. You can still be considered a beauty when you shut your mouth. The black-haired, black-eyed Lord of Despair's most annoying trait was his habit of toying with his prey. And right now, he was still teasing Lady Storm, hoping that she would resist again or even self-destruct. But unfortunately, the two main gods had suddenly attacked her. Currently, the blue female giant was only breathing heavily, and it was impossible for her to respond even if she wanted to. In a sense, when Alos chose to sacrifice himself, Lady Storm's fate was already decided. It was an honor for Lady Storm, who only relied on gambling to become a powerful god, to be schemed against by two main god-level existences and be schemed against by countless big shots. He lured her into the trap with the layout of the national war, shook her believer's faith, and put her in a desperate situation. He used the highest level of despair to make her upset and make the wrong decision. In the end, when her main body descended to the mortal world, she was surrounded and killed by the two main gods. Lady Storm's rocket rise and meteor fall had been destined to become a textbook example for future generations. Of course, if she didn't enter the game, the outcome would still be the same. After the sea race had fled, the two big shots would have forced their way into the god nation and started a war. So, when the water elemental goddess made her choice and made a deal with the neutral side, Lady Storm's fall was already determined. But now, as the victor of the war between the gods, Ale didn't seem happy at all. His handsome face was actually somewhat melancholic and at a loss. This surprised Lord of Despair Heimer, who was familiar with him. What could possibly be a problem for his omnipotent boss? Boss Ale. What's wrong? Could it be that some god is scheming against us? But obviously, Ale had no intention of explaining. He simply glanced at the sunlight peeking through the clouds and sighed. Sigh, it's time. When did this storm that was destined to engulf the entire world begin? The original plan was probably the duel between the Lich and the death god at the river Styx. That was a duel on completely different levels. On one side was the most ancient death god, who had already become the symbol of history and immortality. As the guardian of the cycle of reincarnation, when the order of the river Styx that he protected was disturbed, he would even be able to activate his true body above the river Styx. Not to mention, he also had the support of order and chaos. Even 3 or 4 main gods working together wouldn't be able to do anything to the cycle of reincarnation. To be honest, such a situation had indeed happened before in history. Powerful evil gods desired to improve themselves and search for the mysteries of the source of the world in order to explore the river Styx. However, they all ended up having their futures stolen by the death god. My opponent on the other side had already reached the peak of the mortal world. The undying crown that only appeared in the mortal plane after thousands of years proved how extraordinary he was. But no matter how extraordinary he was still just a mortal. The forbidden spells and undead armies that the Lich was proficient in were nothing in front of the death god. The difference between the newest Lich King and the most ancient death god was like the difference between an ant and a gigantic dragon. And it was precisely this huge difference in power that planted the seed that would change the world. I don't even know why I held back. Perhaps it was because I had seen this familiar face multiple times on the river Styx, or maybe I felt some sympathy for this junior of mine's pitiful fate, or maybe I wanted to know what Ale was trying to do even at the cost of breaking the cycle of reincarnation. Even Ale himself didn't know why he held back at the very end despite being able to kill Ale with a single attack, giving Ale a chance to breathe. I have a plan that can stop the holy war. I wonder if you're interested. Even now, Ale could still remember that Ale's phylactery sword was covered in cracks, and the soul fire in his skull was about to be extinguished at any moment. However, Ale's dying soul didn't show any fear, nor did he beg for mercy. Instead, he slowly told Ale about his astonishing scheme, as well as his arrogant words that were almost impossible to realize. The foundational holy war between order and chaos originated from the world's 2 polar opposites. Even if we ignore their natural instincts and natures, they instinctively desire to destroy the other. That's why, in order to stabilize the world, we need to have at least 3 polar opposites. The more the better. That's right, we need a neutral faction, and you're the only one who can do this. At first, Ale, who was by the river Styx, was only joking as he listened to what this sly Lich who was about to die would say in the end. That's right, when Ale first saw Roland, he felt as if he was looking at a clown who was thinking of ways to defend himself in order to save his own life. We need a new true god. He doesn't need to be that powerful, but he'll be able to make judgments that everyone agrees are fair. We also need a new hell that will replace the current cycle of reincarnation. The current gods' teachings are only for themselves. Since spending money and sucking up to the gods and churches will allow one to enter heaven, so-called leading people to do good is nothing more than a joke. In order to further eliminate the possibility of war, we can spread a new teaching. Only pure good deeds will be able to enter heaven. True warriors who die for justice will enter the eternal Valkyrie temple after death, while villains can only howl in pain in hell as they suffer. Right after that, all these secrets that even main gods wouldn't be able to learn about came out of Ale's mouth. Not only did Ale have no respect for the true gods, he even knew many secrets about the creator goddess. The most ridiculous part was that even though Ale was the evil Lich King, the strongest demon king hated by all living creatures, he kept talking about the mortal world and how good and evil would be repaid. It would have been fine if he was just spouting nonsense, but Ale could sense that Ale was telling the truth. Not only that, He was telling the truth after considering it for a very long time. According to common sense, how could there still be a good Lich who cared about the country and its people in this world? Either Ale had gone insane, or the entire world had gone insane. Interesting, perhaps it was this bit of curiosity that made Ale finally listen to Ale's insane plan. That sounds interesting, but how can you convince me of your sincerity? As the oldest death god, Ale wasn't someone that could be moved by mere words. So what if Ale talked extravagantly? His plan was far too insane and unlikely to work. In Ale's eyes, Ale's plan was nothing more than another way of begging for mercy. However, Ale laughed. His soul fire kept flickering when he laughed, but the emotion he expressed was one of delight. Could it be that simply being able to tell me his plan was a victory for him? At this thought, Ale became even more curious about Ale. According to your rules of protecting the cycle of reincarnation, are you here to kill me? Ale laughed. This time, he didn't even try to hide his laughter. That's right. Fine. After Ale finished laughing, he viciously slammed his cracked sword into the ground and used a spell to guide souls on his phylactery. This time, black mist swirled around Ale's sword, which was said to be unstoppable. Ale's soul was collapsing. Crack. After that crisp sound, Ale's phylactery was now covered in cracks. It would be meaningless for Ale to be unable to protect his phylactery, as he was already destined to die. How's my sincerity in exchange for my life? And so, Roland used his own death in this world to obtain a chance to communicate with Ale on equal footing. Even though Ale helped seal Ale's phylactery and gave Roland time to deal with his funeral matters, Ale still didn't take this matter to heart. It's too difficult. It's impossible. Indeed, it was far too difficult. Creating a brand new power of order and a brand new divine concept by himself was already a great achievement for the god of holy light back in the day. However, reaching this requirement was only the beginning of this plan. Ale quietly rowed his boat on the river Styx. In the blink of an eye, he tossed this matter to the back of his mind. Soon, he received news of Roland's death. Mortals are so weak. What plans to change the world? Ale sighed and shook his head in pity. But soon, his pity transformed into astonishment. Hey, good lad, he actually did something right under my nose. Indeed, back in the day, Roland had truly died. However, Roland had done something to the river Styx and successfully deceived the death god, allowing him to crawl out of the river Styx by himself. As Ale watched with a faint smile on his face, Marguerite and Adam had been waiting for Roland by the river Styx. And so, the unkillable demon king was sealed in the underground. As for whether or not these two heroes had received a message from a certain death god, that was something that nobody could say for sure. However, from a certain standpoint, the sly Roland received Ale's approval. At the very least, when Roland discovered that the Lich was actually alive and well in the underground, he would occasionally visit Roland and chat with him. This was a rare occurrence for Ale, who had very few friends and even fewer enemies, all of whom were dead. But for Ale, that plan had long since been thrown to the back of his mind, until one day. Chapter 448. The Power of Law. Arbiters and Judges. I never expected that there would be a day when this would become a reality. When the light of order reenacted its glory from more than 1,700 years ago, and when the power of law was added to the Order faction, that forgotten loser in the underground suddenly became the focus of everyone's attention. No, calling it everyone's attention would be an exaggeration. After all, only the gods and powerful individuals would have the chance to learn these secrets. In their eyes, the creator of the power of law was the former god of holy light. It would only take a single thought for him to ascend to godhood. Considering that the son of nature, who had already died, but had children, Mother Earth, and the god of holy light, the creators of the power of order were already main gods, the crazy Lich from back in the day who had gone crazy in the underground city was now viewed by these gods as a candidate to become a main god. No, it should be said that he would become a future main god. In the entire Order faction, there were only 7 such existences. Such a position was probably second only to the creator goddesses of order. This was an unparalleled honor, supreme glory, and a stairway to eternity. The main gods of the Chaos faction would have to worry about dying from fighting each other. As for the main gods of the Order faction, although there were many restrictions, as long as they followed the infrequent instructions of the Source of Order, it was basically impossible for them to die. Congratulations. When do you intend to ascend to godhood? Perhaps we'll become allies in the future. Perhaps the arrival of the Holy War will also be an opportunity for you to ascend to godhood. Although he didn't know why Roland knew so much about the secrets of the gods, as a rare drinking buddy, Ale also sent his best wishes and an invitation to form an alliance. What? Ascend to godhood? Isn't that the day that our plan began? Hearing that Roland intentionally emphasized the word hour, Ale finally recalled the plan that he had long since forgotten in his mind. That unrealistic and insane plan. He continued speaking after a long while. Are you certain? With my help and the power of law that you created, perhaps you'll soon become an existence equal to me. On one side is the Eternal Order main god, and on the other side is that insane plan with an incredibly low possibility of success. Can you still make a choice here? Even if the Creator Goddess created a new world and a new generation of residents after her destruction, even if all mortals were wiped out, even if she created a new world from scratch, the main gods would still be supreme existences. In the eyes of the mortals, their very existence was eternal. If news of this got out, in everyone's eyes, Roland would be a complete lunatic, treating the easily obtainable undying as a joke, instead throwing everything into a pitifully low chance of winning a gamble. However, Ale still remembered that the skeleton's face was filled with shock and disbelief, looking at him as if he was a fool. Sovereign. So what? Is there any meaning to eternity that is like a zombie? What was the point of being a walking corpse? Even Ale paused in surprise for a moment when he heard Roland's arrogant words. After his astonishment, he became furious. Without a doubt, the Lich's blasphemous words were a denial of the meaning of all God's existence. But while Ale was furious, his past memories flashed before his eyes. The devils in hell, this ridiculous endless holy war, mortals dancing on the gods' palms like puppets, and of course, the soul wheat that would be harvested in the end. The gods treat the mortals' lives and pursuits as a joke and a flawed stage play. Then, in the eyes of a higher-level existence, aren't the gods' arrogance nothing more than clowns pulling strings in a puppet play? Even if these puppets are of a higher level, isn't such arrogance laughable if they can't even control their own fates? Wouldn't this kind of eternity and undying be even more valuable than the mortals' lives? Ale's anger vanished when he noticed that the Lich before him actually viewed fate and the truth even more clearly than he did. What came next was a question after a long period of contemplation. You're serious? Hey, Boss Ale, I've always been serious, alright? Don't tell me you're quitting at such a time. I've had a hard time all this way, alright? The Lich's snickering smile was as ugly and frightening as ever. But only now did Ale realize that beneath this frivolous face, he had long since seen through everything. Roland knew that Ale had always treated his plan as a joke, but he had always been working hard in secret, making all the necessary arrangements to turn this joke that everyone didn't think highly of into reality. Right now, when the light of law illuminated the entire world, and when the gods were waiting for their new ally to ascend to the divine throne, the lucky one who created the path of law suddenly fell silent. The gods had been unable to see the god of law ascend to the divine throne for a long time, so of course there were many discussions. Only a flash in the pan. An incomplete soul probably isn't enough to ascend to the honorable divine throne. Perhaps, this divine concept will only benefit a certain junior in the end. Could it be that he's just doing good deeds? Not only the gods, even the undying and follower gods began to ridicule the Lich who was unable to ascend to the divine throne. But as long as Ale knew the reason why Roland hadn't ascended to the divine throne yet, it was because he wasn't satisfied with the newly born light of law. No. Right now, the light of law is too similar to the holy light. It's meaningless to only represent punishment. What's more important is the redemption of sinners and the forgiveness of the innocent. The Church's teachings are like this: there's an invisible eye observing your actions. All crimes will be judged in the end, and the purgatory of the dead awaits you. No one can be an exception. Did I make a mistake again? Why don't we try polarizing the Church's teachings? We'll have higher requirements for the God of Law's believers and executors, and we'll have the most basic restrictions for all mortals. Yep, in order to make it more convincing, we'll use God's law. No purgatory or heaven? Heh, isn't that our next plan? In Sulphur Mountain City, which was mostly shrouded in darkness, Roland patiently revised his own plans and Church's teachings. The Church of Law's teachings actually went through several hundred revisions. The light of law, which was originally far too blinding, became polarizing and gentle under the guidance of its creator. The law itself shouldn't have any will. It's simply a bottom line that everyone has to follow. Only those who cross the line will be punished. The law would save and protect the weak, but would mercilessly judge and punish those who did evil. Unlike the holy light, which was naturally hostile to the undead, demons, and other creatures of chaos, the newly born power of order actually didn't have any natural enemies. Later on, different people would have different natures of power. Looking at the completely different light of law, Ale even suspected that Roland also had a crazy dual personality. However, Roland hadn't wasted 100 years of time. Compared to the original holy light, the power of law that had been polished for 100 years was much more modest. Its silver glow was just like the moonlight, calming the hearts of others. But, the moment that the law's bottom line was touched, it would be as merciless as the cold gleam of a guillotine's blade. Perhaps this newly born power of law, this new boundary, will finally be able to make both factions stop. Perhaps Roland's determination finally moved him, or perhaps the highest death god had accumulated enough dissatisfaction, but Ale finally made his decision as he watched the gradually perfecting power of law. And right now, the success rate of this plan was no more than 20%. Yep, there are far too many unpredictable factors. I can't guarantee that it'll definitely succeed, but now it seems that it's possible to take a gamble. Compared to doing nothing at all, at least it's possible to try. Roland was quite honest, and he had no choice but to be honest. The truth was right in front of everyone, and no one here was an idiot. Nobody would willingly board a ship that was destined to sink. It was impossible for him to promise that he would definitely win. At the very least, it's not completely hopeless. That's right, compared to the entire mortal plane's soul harvesting and the destruction of the gods that would follow, this seemed like a path of survival that had been found in a hopeless situation. While searching for a path of survival and exploring for a long time, more and more companions boarded Roland's ark, which seemed like it would sink at any moment. Roland didn't try to hide the pitifully low chance of success, but Adam and Marguerite unhesitatingly boarded the ark after learning the truth. The Northland's knight from the Northlands couldn't even be chased off the ark, and the gentleman from the Northlands also boarded the ark at an unknown time. The Church of Law itself was a part of the ark. Sulphur Mountain City's residents boarded the ark. The Underground City Alliance boarded the ark. The Northlands countries also boarded the ark. The Mage country was tricked into boarding the ark, and the Wood Spirits also joined the ark. Even the fairies, who had always been neutral, used their actions to express their stance. Unknowingly, the grand plan was no longer just Roland's personal actions. More and more people started walking down this path of their own volition. Some of them had righteous intentions, some had personal conflicts of interest, and some simply wanted to survive this holy war. But no matter what the reason was, since they boarded the ark, they indeed became a power on Roland's side. More and more like-minded people started walking together. This difficult path of salvation became much easier to walk. Of course, compared to the two factions that occupied both ends of the world, the neutral side's strength was still nothing. Did they not notice anything at all? At the very least, the Chaos faction had obtained plenty of information. Their enmity with the God of Holy Light was a fact that was obvious to all. No, it wasn't that they didn't notice anything, it was that they couldn't be bothered to care. Both sides still viewed each other as the number one enemy. As for the third party that tried to do something, aren't those the clowns that have always appeared in every holy war? Let us see what kind of performance you sinners can put on. From the perspective of the two factions that occupied both ends of the Chaos faction, these people who were secretly conspiring with each other would naturally be considered traitors. They would be the pinnacle of conspiracies, the worst of the most basic order in the entire world. They would be clowns that would be easily crushed. And now, most of the holes in this ark had been fixed. It was almost time for the ark to set sail. The most important passenger, no, the helmsman should board the ark, even if that would mean directly breaking off relations with both the Chaos faction and the Chaos faction. Accomplices. Roland, you've truly chosen an appropriate term. ALS memories from his time in the wilderness gradually surfaced in his mind. He had seen far too many changes in the world. The main characters of this world were constantly changing. Ancient humans, gold elves, Halletdam generation, Middle Ages humans, great demons, superior elves, and so on. So many civilizations and their glory had even caused the gods to exclaim in admiration. But in the end, these glorious civilizations and their buildings were all reduced to rubble in the flames of war. In this cycle of creation and destruction, civilization was advancing. Civilization was retreating. Civilization was at a standstill. Civilization had reached its peak. Or, in the eyes of the Creator, mortal civilizations are nothing more than sand castles on the beach, completely worthless to begin with. All undead had perished due to their unwillingness to fall into eternal slumber. The most ancient and original undead were no exception. The long passage of time had caused him to forget his very first obsession. However, there was one thing that he still remembered. In the very beginning of the Ashi era, gods and humans had lived together. Although the natural environment was extremely harsh, with famine and vicious beasts everywhere, and dimensional laws were broken so that dimensional invaders were common, at the very least, the strong wouldn't look down on the weak as if they were ants. Weak life forms wouldn't be so desperate, and civilization wouldn't be broken so many times due to man-made reasons. It was quite difficult to reclaim the lands in the Dark Era. The sages and tribal leaders raised their banners high, while the gods and semigods used primitive totems to protect the mortals. There was no such thing as the power of belief, but the tribesmen sincerely worshipped and respected the gods who protected them. Ale had returned to the past countless times in his dreams. As an undead, he crawled out from under a tombstone. Wasn't it because he was worried about his own tribesmen? At the very least, the ancient gods of that generation were trustworthy. They would use their own hands and feet to protect and help mortals, rather than sitting high up in their temples, reciting false teachings, and waiting for the chance to harvest souls. Just who's the devil that's stealing souls? But now, generation after generation of gods had become nothing more than decorations on their thrones because of their so-called divine concepts and beliefs. The tribesmen of the High Mountain tribe had become demons cursed by the mortals, repeatedly serving as cannon fodder and puppets in the eternal holy war. Was this the fate that the first generation of humans should have? Was this the world that the creator goddesses desired? Mother Goddess, is this the order and unity that you desire to see? Sister Cynthia, is the evolution that you desire to see the endless destruction of the cycle of reincarnation? Since you don't give us the right to live, why give us hope? We aren't your puppets or toys. It's time for this boring war to end. It's time. Red, black, and grey. The death god held a three-colored rose of death in his hand, transforming it into a storm that swept through everything. The undying death god made his decision. From today onwards, we shall break away from order, and no longer belong to chaos. The moment that he said this, the entire world shook violently. As one of the strongest existences in the world, his words were tangible power. When he announced this, countless responses echoed in every divine domain. From today onwards, we shall break away from order, and no longer belong to chaos. We, more than 10 gods, were chanting in their own divine kingdoms. In every corner of the world, one could see the burning sky and the shaking space. From today onwards, we shall break away from order, and no longer belong to chaos. Perhaps the source of order's mistake was that it didn't start instilling its own beliefs like the Chaos faction did from a young age. Instead, it gave the hearts of the gods who had started out as mortals. Not every mortal who became a god would forget their roots. When truth and hope were placed in front of them, they would make a choice. Belong to the Hades. We are the gods of the Hades. Countless gigantic meteors tore through the sky. These gigantic meteors broke the common sense of mortals. In the eyes of mortals, when a true god died, their divine kingdom would transform into a meteor that tore through the sky. But now, what did this meteor shower represent? Every meteor was even more powerful than the meteor shower that Rose had just died. Could it be that more than 10 powerful gods simultaneously died? This was absolutely impossible. Not even the entire mortal plane had that many powerful gods. They didn't die. They betrayed us. The Cloud Tower's astrology archmage Salo's face was covered in cold sweat. His legs were trembling, but he was able to make a professional judgment in front of his peers. These gods hadn't died. They were currently pulling their divine kingdoms away from the source of order's control and into an unknown plane. If this wasn't betrayal, what was? More than 10 true gods in the entire Order faction had betrayed us all at once. The mortal believers were completely stunned. However, the gods who had died together with their divine kingdoms were all excited and excited. They had waited far too long for this day. Sigh, I won't be able to make any money for several years. I hope that I can do business in the netherworld. Bayana was quite displeased. Her business had been getting better and better recently, but she was about to leave. Even if you reach the Hades, your contract warrior system has long since entered a self-sustaining cycle. It can still be used, and your main business won't be affected. We're only leaving for a few years. Or, do you intend to stay here and face the attacks of those old fellows? Shut up. I need to sense the existence of that plane. What should I do if I get lost in the void? Unlike her usual silence, the Moonlight Goddess was now quite excited. She had waited far too long for this day. Even though she had the divine concept of guidance and had to take on the role of navigator, she was unable to suppress her joy. Finally, I'm free. Even before leaving, the god of fate didn't forget his mission. He viciously shook the stars in the sky, causing all the stars to fall into chaos. The traces of fate once again became chaotic, causing all prophecy abilities to become useless. It made it even less likely that he would be able to track the Hades plane. And even if he didn't take action, the truth wouldn't have made a difference. Ale no longer needed to hide his full power. The entire dragon world, Hades, plane was now completely separated from the mortal plane. Soon, the dragon world would completely lose contact with the other planes. The holy war had already begun, and the angels and demons were about to fight. The Order and Chaos factions' anger would never be able to reach the Hades gods. That's right, the Hades gods. The new plane would become the main base for the neutral gods. They would create a self-sustaining new world there, completely breaking the Order and Chaos factions' monopoly on the mortal plane. At this time, the Ale faction had completely fallen out with the Order faction. But considering the difference in power between the Order faction and the Order faction, the neutral gods would disappear into the depths of the Hades before the Holy War reached its climax. However, they would still be able to infuse their divine power into their believers through the backdoor they left behind. Just like the evil gods living in the Chaos Abyss, the source of order would no longer be able to control them. If this was a time of peace, the source of order would naturally organize a crusade against the evil gods. But now that the Holy War was imminent, the Chaos faction wouldn't miss out on this period of weakness. As long as both sides entered an all-out war, they naturally wouldn't have any spare energy to track down the neutral Hades gods. And according to the grand plan, when the Hades gods reappeared on the battlefield of the Holy War, they should have the ability to completely stop this war. All the signs indicated that the Order gods were divided. Even the gods were at a loss, and all the divine job class members were naturally in a frenzy. And at this moment, another meteor suddenly fell from the sky. This meteor was tearing apart the entire sky. Its mass far surpassed any of the previous gods. Main god, which main god is it? Holy light above. This. Main god Anslo. He actually betrayed us at such a time. Don't misunderstand, this main god had fallen in a different direction from the other Hades gods. He had fallen into the lower planes, the bottomless chaos abyss where the demons resided. This main god of the elves had long since wanted to betray the Order gods, so he unhesitatingly took this opportunity to betray them. Obviously, he had chosen an excellent opportunity. Ale's betrayal was now obvious, and the source of order would definitely send out assassins to hunt down the other Hades gods. Naturally, they wouldn't have the spare energy to send out main god-level existences to hunt him down. While the main god of the elves successfully hitched a ride, and the other Aelside gods were all heading towards the Hades gods, the main culprit Ael was currently standing quietly by the river Styx. The murky river Styx kept lapping against the banks of the river Styx, and demons' pitiful howls could be heard in the nearby ruins of the Sea of Fire. More than 100 years ago, Ael and Roland had come up with their grand plan here. And now, the most important page of their grand plan was about to be opened here. It's time. Chapter 449. We don't have much time left. It's time for us to make a decision. Please give us your answer. While the entire mortal plane was in chaos, the winged messengers were busy as well. Solo had already cursed his unscrupulous colleagues countless times, but all the gods felt that being a diplomatic envoy was their natural duty. What god of messengers? I'm clearly the guardian of bards. I'm not a professional errand boy. I'm the god of inspiration for artists. But from a certain standpoint, since Solo was always on various diplomatic missions, outsiders had long since forgotten about his identity as ALS messenger. Quite a few had forgotten about his true job. And now, as a messenger, Solo had already fulfilled his duty and stated his side's request for a contract. However, the other side of the contract was quite hesitant. Yet, Solo was negotiating with two gigantic existences that represented two major factions. Even though a god's incarnation was as large as a giant's, he was still nothing more than a tiny mosquito in front of these two existences. The stronger a giant was, the larger it would be. This seemed to be a Titan species tradition. Compared to his own species, the Titan King was also the largest. The fourth-ranked Titan, Yin's, actually reached up to his waist. The current Solo was nothing more than a tiny mosquito in front of the Titan King's eyelashes. The Titan King's ancient appearance and well-built body were as perfect as a statue. His simple armor only covered some of his vitals. Rather than calling it a weapon, it was more like a decoration for a statue. The Titan King stood there as if he were a god from another generation. However, nobody would actually treat him as a statue. That was because he was surrounded by lightning and storms. Just the energy level of his existence far surpassed any so-called forbidden spell. The lightning that could destroy an entire city silently flowed around him like a slowly flowing stream. However, the lightning didn't leak out in the slightest. The Titan King's ancient and serious expression didn't reveal any emotion when faced with Solo's question. It was just that the Titan King and his tribe were currently in a terrible situation. The entire sky was filled with holes and cracks, and the ground was constantly cracking. Numerous small mountains were floating in midair. The entire world seemed to be on the verge of collapsing. Titan King, you should know what Lord Ael wants. Our time is limited, so please make a decision as soon as possible. That's right, Titan was his name. In the ancient language, it meant the tallest and largest person. Obviously, he completely fulfilled this standard. As the first Titan, Titan naturally became his name. All the other Titans called him elder brother. He was the most ancient son of the earth, the eldest son of the goddess of order, and the strongest warrior of the immemorial era. In terms of strength, as the most powerful existence in ancient times, he was definitely not any weaker than the current so-called main gods even if he had been sealed for a long time. In fact, in the entire Titan race, there were definitely 2 or 3 main gods who had reached the standard of a main god in terms of combat prowess. Yep, just by looking at combat strength, the Titans had never feared any so-called gods. In fact, there was even a saying that the Titans were the original form of the ancient gods, and that the creator goddess had used the Titans as a template to create the original gods. The Titans usually had their own unique natural talents. Some of their natural talents were no weaker than the gods' natural laws. But compared to the various gods, the Titans' greatest advantage was their ability to fight. The Titan King Yin's, who was ranked 4th, and the Titan King Harley, who was ranked 2nd, were able to suppress the gods' incarnations with their own power levels. In ancient legends, not only were the Titans the best artists and architects in all the planes, they were also the strongest warriors under the command of the creator goddesses of order. The Titans were enemies with all sorts of demons from other planes, while the gods were the ones who controlled the dimensional laws of the planes. It could be said that they were civil officials who wouldn't easily enter the battlefield. It was a tradition for the Titans to look down on the gods since they loved to fight. How could a weak civil official in a high position possibly get along with a military official who spent most of his time on the front lines? Ever since there was a shortcut to becoming a god through faith, there were more and more powerful gods and even main gods. But in ancient times where the Titans only relied on their own cultivation, the Titans' combat strength far surpassed the so-called ancient gods. They were unwilling to submit to the rule of the weak, which was why the Titans finally rebelled against the goddess of order's order. These existences who reached the peak through cultivation and combat also looked down on the so-called main gods and powerful gods. Actually, if a battle really broke out, it would be difficult to say who would win. Finally, the collapse of the entire dragon world and the Titan's fear caused the Titan King to be unable to remain silent any longer. His low voice sounded like thunder. Such dirty schemes and such sly methods. This isn't A-less style. Since Titan was willing to speak up, there was room for negotiation. Solo was secretly delighted, but he didn't reveal any of this on his face. Yep, Boss Ale has a rather direct personality, so he wouldn't use such underhanded methods. However, the mastermind behind this plan is our little bro. His reputation is as bad as his hands. As long as the results are good, he's never afraid of dirtying his hands. Just look, as long as you agree to our conditions, won't the final result be excellent? Solo unhesitatingly sold out Roland, even though Roland definitely wouldn't mind. Currently, the Titan King sunk into deep thought. As the leader of the Titan tribe, he definitely wasn't as brash as he appeared to be. In fact, it was the opposite. In the past, the Titan King had a good relationship with the ancient humans, and he even had some friendship with Ale. The fact that the Titan tribe was able to survive up until now without any internal strife meant that he had excellent leadership abilities as the Titan tribe's leader. This wasn't something that could be achieved through power alone. The Titan King was incredibly intelligent. He was the one who had his brothers create an incarnation from the Titan tribe's stone statue to travel around the mortal plane. This was so that the Titan tribe would be able to escape from the mortal plane. Even though the Titan tribe had been sealed, he had made many plans. Unfortunately, none of them had been used. The Titan King could sense that this mortal plane was no longer connected to the other planes. It was still possible to enter from another plane, but it was almost impossible to leave. Also, the mortal plane was collapsing thousands of times faster than he had expected. There wasn't much time left. The Titan King knew that it would be impossible for the Titans to leave this mortal plane since they didn't have the coordinates to the other planes. Even if the strongest of the Titans were able to leave, it would be impossible for the giant's descendants to escape. Although the entire dragon world was collapsing, the Titan King and his tribe were protected by the Titans. The land around them didn't seem to be shaken at all. However, everyone knew that once the entire world was destroyed, even if they were able to survive and maintain a simple ecosystem, they would have to use up all their resources and supplies in the endless void. Everyone knew that the Titans had no path of retreat. That was why a devil messenger came to take advantage of the situation, and he even brought an offer that the Titans couldn't refuse. Little Lizard, what's your decision? The negotiations between the three sides reached an impasse. The Titan King looked towards the other side, who was also in the same situation. Not long ago, the two sides had been mortal enemies. Supreme Immemorial Gold Dragon Loft was the ancestor of the Immemorial Gold Dragon Horus. He was also one of the most ancient existences in Dragon World. However, even though he was large enough to cover an entire city, he was only the size of a palm in front of the original Titan King. The Titans had always looked down on dragons. Even the giants, one of their species, dared to challenge the dragons. How could a pure Titan King possibly respect the dragons? You want to be respected? Sure, show me your true power and invite all the older dragons who had experienced the ancient God Wars to come out. Perhaps Supreme Immemorial Gold Dragon Loft was the oldest, and the strongest existence among the dragons. However, compared to the most ancient Titan King, Loft would probably be killed by 1 or 2 slaps. Venerated god of artists, I represent Dragon City and agree to all of your conditions. The old dragon pretended that he didn't hear the Titan King's words at all. He turned around and nodded directly at Solo, which meant that he agreed to the contract. Since one of the 3 sides agreed to the contract first, the other side would naturally be forced into a passive position. That's great. The Dragon Clan is indeed the most sensible and intelligent clan. The handsome Solo smiled brightly as he praised the Titan King. Judging from the results, he had already completed half of his mission. It's just as that guy said. As long as there's a threat to their lives, dragons will have no morals at all. That's what the little guy thinks. The one-eyed Titan King laughed strangely. His diamond-like eye seemed to see through everything. He was the ancestor of the one-eyed giants, Argus the Mind Reader. He was able to read even the thoughts of a god's incarnation. This was more than enough to prove how powerful and unreasonable the Titan King's natural talents were. Argus was currently laughing strangely as he said this, but then he frowned, because he read what Solo had added in his own mind. So what if you've seen through everything? Refuse if you dare. It must be fun to watch all of you starve to death in the void, big idiot. You actually dare to laugh at us? Argus' angry roar was stopped by the Titan King. Such anger was meaningless. The Titan King had long since seen through everything. Right now, it wasn't the Ale faction that needed help, but the Titan King. The Titan King and the Titan King had completely different conditions. How could they negotiate? This wasn't a negotiation from the very start. This was a negotiation to give the Titan King a way out of this embarrassing situation, forcing the Titan King to obey the Titan King's arrangements. The Titan Kings had never been good-tempered, but they weren't idiots either. Currently, the Titan Kings were releasing all sorts of pressure that made Solo's incarnation, who only had semigod combat power, feel quite uncomfortable. Solo had a bitter expression on his face, as if he couldn't bear the Titan King's pressure. He had given the Titan Kings enough face, but deep down, he admired his daring companion even more. Solo had even dared to threaten and extort the powerful Titan Kings. So what if you're undefeatable in the world? Since you've lost the initiative and allowed me to make all sorts of arrangements, won't they just obediently become my chess pieces? Roland's words were still echoing in Solo's ears. It was evident that the one-eyed Titan King also heard Roland's words. However, he knew that saying such words would only make his own Titan King even more embarrassed, so he could only vent his anger on the shaking ground. Argus viciously pounded the ground. He even tried to uproot the surrounding mountains and cause an earthquake, just like in the past. However, he only managed to pound a few times before his own Titan King stopped him. This revealed to the Titan Kings that the Titan King's territory was unstable, and that the Titan Kings wouldn't be able to last for much longer. Using an appropriate amount of forcefulness would also make it easier for the Titan Kings to negotiate. Although the Titan Kings' expressions became quite grim, they at least knew to throw away their pride and save some precious time. Even if we're facing destruction, we won't submit to the weak. We hope to obtain the Titan King's recognition. At the very least, we need him to defeat his enemies by himself and prove that he has the ability to become the ruler of the Chaos Dimension. The Titan King's voice was quite deep, but it was powerful. This was his bottom line. If Ale and Roland couldn't prove that they had the ability to fight against the Order faction and the Chaos faction, then he definitely wouldn't join this doomed ship. That's reasonable. This was also what Ale had expected. Solo nodded and reached out with his hand, gathering the light of a contract. As long as Roland obtains victory in this battle and successfully creates the Hell of Hades, the Titan Kings shall become the guardian gods of the land of Spring and Heaven of Hades, protecting all life in these two lands. That's right, this was the job that Roland had arranged for the Titans. They would be the guardian gods of the land of Spring, which would allow all life to flourish. They would also be the guardian gods of the Heaven of Hades, which would allow some gods and kind-hearted people to live in. Just the Hell of Hades alone would be impossible to create an independent world of its own. According to the God of Law's teachings, the wicked would go to hell to atone for their sins, while the kind-hearted would naturally go to heaven to enjoy their blessings. Only hell and purgatory would be unable to create a complete cycle. In order to replace the cycle of reincarnation, I'll naturally need a complete cycle of reincarnation. The dragon world of Hades was about to be completely separated from the other planes. Any living that entered the land of the dead would never be able to return alive. That was why Roland had created a temporary mortal world, the Land of Spring. This would give the living a place to live and give souls that had atoned for their sins the possibility of entering the cycle of reincarnation again. As for the heaven of Hades, it would probably only be enough for a few ale gods who weren't on duty to enter. It would probably take a long time before the heaven of Hades would be truly useful. However, that wouldn't stop Roland from adding it to his contract with the Titan Kings. Yep, this is what you call taking advantage of me. Since you've boarded my ship, you'll naturally have to work for me. What? You're saying that you didn't voluntarily board my ship? Fine, get off the ship now. The endless void is waiting for you. From a certain standpoint, Roland is truly going overboard. Alright then, Roland was furious to the point of being unable to vent his anger. The pitiful one-eyed giant began pounding the ground with his head. Since then, he firmly remembered the name Roland in his mind. The contract with the dragons was about the same as Roland's contract, but it was actually even harsher than the contract with the Titan Kings. But when considering the difference in power between the Titans and the Titan Kings, as well as the fact that Roland wasn't involved, it was likely that the Titan Kings would start eating dragon meat right now. The dragons could only smile and agree to this unfair contract before gritting their teeth and swallowing it down. Solo had just heaved a sigh of relief after completing his mission when he saw a meteor suddenly descending from the sky. His heart tightened. Although the allied gods had arrived, this also meant that Roland had completely fallen out with the Order faction. Not only that, it also meant that Roland's plan had entered its most critical juncture. Success or failure would be decided here. It's time. Chapter 450. Weak gods, middle gods, powerful gods, and main gods. No one knew who came up with the concept of low gods, middle gods, high gods, and main gods. However, this was far too distant a concept for the mortals in the mortal plane. The mortals called Gold Rank Master as they viewed it as their life's goal. The next level would be Legend. As for the higher levels, the mortals took it for granted. For some ancient species, Legend was only the starting point. Saint-ranked existences would probably be at the very beginning of the mortal plane. Sage-ranked existences would be at the level of true transformation and difficulty, and semigod existences would be limitless. The Titans ranked at the very top would only be semigods in terms of power levels. However, even main gods wouldn't dare to fight against them alone. Similar to the Titans were the existences that had existed since the beginning of time. Those ancient existences would either find a random dimension to live in seclusion in, or they would simply go into hibernation. This was one of the reasons why there were so many forbidden areas in the mortal plane and other dimensions. There was even a supreme immemorial dragon who directly went to the Chaos Abyss to become the ruler of that dimension. Even then, the Chaos Abyss never gave her any trouble. Speaking of which, if the price of becoming famous was being dragged into the holy war that only happened once every 1,000 or 2,000 years, any powerful ancient species with normal intelligence would probably find a place to bury themselves. Their power levels would be impossible to evaluate with the current power level system. Dragons were strong and skilled in both magic and martial arts, elves were skilled in magic, beastmen were pure and skilled in combat, and gods were skilled at using their own divine concepts and natural laws to cheat. There were all sorts of strange natural talents and inheritances. Trying to rank them together would be meaningless. Actually, the current power level system was only for humans to explore their own potential. High-level gods existed for the sake of showing off to the weak. The seemingly powerful power levels were only to let the weak know where they should be, so that they wouldn't provoke the strong too much. Of course, the current power level system would probably be sufficient in a low magic generation. But in the middle and later stages of the Holy War, where liches were everywhere and semigods were like dogs, the current power level system would naturally become useless. Naturally, a more suitable power level system would be needed. But no matter what, main gods would always stand at the peak of all species and life. Roland had been quite curious about such existences in the past, so he had asked Ale about them. As for main gods, there aren't any detailed classifications. Those who are able to easily tear apart other gods as if they were made of paper would be considered main gods. They've all experienced countless years to reach their current level. Even in the Holy War, it's difficult for them to die. They're the accumulation of the entire plane's history. There were 7 such existences in the Order faction and 14 in the Chaos faction. Currently, there were only 5 in the Order faction, 13 in the Chaos faction, and 3 in the neutral faction, Hades. If the ancient races that lived in seclusion were not included, these 21 gods were the most powerful existences in the world. The Lord of Putrefaction had been exiled to the mortal plane, the Devil Lord had led his people to betray the will of the Chaos Abyss, and the Chaos War God had remained undefeated for countless years. Every single main god had countless legends behind them. They were all existences who stood at the peak of the world in both power and intelligence. Even the elf main god, who appeared to be a second-rate main god amongst main gods, was quite sly and scheming. Not only did he have the great achievement of destroying the gold elves, the superior species, but just looking at his recent actions, it was easy to see just how sly and scheming he was. Roland seized the opportunity and chose the perfect time to betray the Order faction. Not only that, the Silver Elves and the Moon Elves were currently embroiled in a civil war. It would seem that Roland, as an elf main god, was unable to even protect his own people, an obvious dereliction of duty. However, some things couldn't be judged on the surface. That's right, now that Roland had joined the Chaos faction, the Moon Elves who were close to him would likely join the Order faction as well in order to avoid being punished. Meanwhile, the Silver Elves and the other elven gods would still join the Order faction, and the two sides would continue their civil war. For the time being, other species wouldn't have any reason to interfere, nor would there be any need to interfere. Yep, this was the typical style of the elves, they would go where the wind blows and bet on both sides. No matter who won or lost, at least some elves would be able to survive this holy war. Of course, the prerequisite was that there wouldn't be a ridiculous ending where the entire world would end. From a certain standpoint, Roland had no choice. The holy war was imminent. Unlike the last holy war where the elves were the rulers, the humans were the rulers this time. Even if there was no need to think too much about it, sending allies onto the battlefield to defend important areas, where they could be sacrificed, and acting as vanguards, cannon fodder, was a shared tradition between the elves and humans. Plus, it was obvious that the Order faction was at a disadvantage in this war, so it wouldn't be easy for them to sacrifice their allies. And the elves' civil war wasn't an act at all. Any act would be impossible to fool any high-level existence. The elves truly viewed each other as mortal enemies, and no matter who won or lost the civil war, the elves would definitely be greatly weakened. From the very start, Roland had chosen to sacrifice more than half of his people in order to survive this holy war. Not only could one see how ruthless and decisive the elf main god was, it was also more evidence that he didn't have a high opinion of the situation in this holy war. Apart from a certain main god, there were basically no main gods who were alone. And that certain main god who seemed to be alone had now revealed his claws and fangs. Ale is special. Yep, that certain main god was Ale. Ale was the most special main god of all. Not only did he not have a specific job, he didn't have any followers, nor did he have anyone to protect him. Alright then, we all knew that this was just a facade. But, in the eyes of everyone else, Ale was always a loner who traveled the world. In legends, Ale would often appear as a black-robed death god who brought death with him. Of course, Ale usually wasn't a good character either. And, the most special part about Ale was that he didn't need to participate in the Holy War. That's right, Ale didn't need to participate in the Holy War, but the other Order main gods were destined to be involved. Ale would always be able to coldly watch as the newly born gods fought each other's brains out, and then smoothly become one of the victors. This was obviously something that the other newly born gods couldn't understand. But, if you asked about Ale's responsibilities, it was understandable. Ale is the guardian of the cycle of reincarnation. He's an eternal neutral. Due to the fact that there were some people who would die by chance, Roland being one of them, Ea, as the guardian of the river Styx, didn't intentionally hide his actions. Ea's duties were an undisclosed secret among high-level existences. However, there was another piece of information that not many people knew. Ale is undefeatable. This wasn't some vague description like the strongest or the most powerful. Rather, it was a description that no existence would be able to directly face Ale. This was the reality for countless high-level existences. Ale was undefeatable by the river Styx. The reason? During the last Holy War, two newly born Order main gods, Wood Elves and Silver Elves, believed that destroying the river Styx would cause the demons and devils to lose their newborns. Since they understood Ale's responsibilities, they ignored their seniors' advice. The end result was that they brought along several powerful elven gods and were all killed by the death god's scythe. From a certain standpoint, this unexpected large-scale death of gods was also the main reason why the entire elven species and elven gods had such a hard time in the last Holy War. By the way, this was also one of the reasons why the elven kingdoms and elven gods hated the undead so much. Yep, this was the elven gods taking out their anger on the undead. Even now, they still didn't dare to take revenge on Ale. However, back at the river Styx, Ale had only used a single black rose to kill all these gods. He simply silently watched as the black rose in his hand bloomed. When the black petals fluttered in the wind, the river Styx was filled with the corpses of the gods. Although Ale was praised as undefeatable because of this, his overly easy victory caused many to doubt him. That was because the power level he displayed was far too astonishing. If he had been willing to fight on the battlefield, no matter which side he chose to help, the Holy War would likely have ended instantly. It wasn't difficult to guess the secret behind Ale's unreasonably powerful strength. Just by looking at Ale's job history and his other combat records, it was obvious that Ale's ridiculously powerful strength was only limited to when he was protecting the river Styx. And now, when his own tribe and allies had all escaped into the Hades, Ale met a familiar figure by the river Styx. The one walking at the very front was naturally a figure of pure light. This dazzling light formed a figure with unparalleled divine might. This was another incarnation of the god of holy light. It seemed that the publicly acknowledged strongest main god, the god of holy light, was finally going to fight against the publicly acknowledged undefeatable main god, Ale. However, Ale hadn't come by himself. His divine might was on the same level as Ale, which doubtlessly meant that even if Ale wasn't a main god, he would at least be a powerful god. Chapter 451. Historians liked to use important events as bookmarks for their eras. When the spring of AD 1898 came, perhaps no one would have expected that the whole world would have a fundamental change. There were so many important events that happened that year, and their influence was so wide that it seemed that those scholars could write hundreds of research notes and earn money for hundreds of years. If one were to look back at history, the changes were quite obvious. AD 1896 was the year of the dragon. With Wu Mianxi's ascension to godhood as the starting point, the Silent Ale faction entered a period of activity. The incarnations of the saints began to walk the earth, the schemers and messengers of conspiracies traveled the entire world, and Roland arrived on the surface. AD 1897, the year of the Griffin. The entire world descended into a period of impending storms. Thanks to Roland and the others' efforts, the Northlands countries that won the war to defend their territories successfully became independent. The Ottoman Empire, Bardi, Shiluor Empire, the Mist Alliance, the Underground, and other countries all reached a tacit agreement in secret. The Panarch faction, also known as the Hades faction, was formed. AD 1898, the year of the Vulture, was also the year in which the Holy War fully began. This was also the year in which many major events erupted. Although the dark clouds of war covered the sky, angels and demons from the Chaos faction forcefully descended upon the mortal plane. Estrada's sacrifice gave new explanations to holy light, and the elves' internal strife and the betrayal of their main gods caused the elves' future to be in a state of confusion. However, if one wanted to find the greatest bright spot among all these events, they would have to look at everything that happened by the river Styx. The direct result of this event was that the original generation of AD had been abandoned, and a new generation of foot had to be created from scratch. AD 1898, the spring of the vultures, which was also the year of the black rats in Foot 1. Beside the river Styx, the guest that the white-robed young man had been waiting for finally arrived, but he still had no intention of raising his head. I didn't expect that it would actually come to this. Even Ale himself had not expected that things would come to this. At this moment, he had undoubtedly become the enemy of the world. The god behind him didn't seem like he would give him any more time to sigh. This was a pair of smiling twin sisters. The older sister in front had an appearance similar to that of an elf, but she was surrounded by wood. Her grayish-brown dress was also covered in a long beard made of wood fibers. Her dark green hair was also the color of tree leaves. If it wasn't for the fact that the wood spirits didn't have adult female appearances, their auras that were so close to nature would make them seem like the wood spirit sisters. The elder sister had a similar appearance to the tree demon, but her younger sister had 4 hooves on the ground, happily galloping back and forth, just like a wild centaur. The sisters of joy and laughter were once the descendants of the Lord God of nature. Compared to their powerful ancestors, they were still powerful gods even though they only had a partial divine title. They were the protectors of nature, as well as some of Druil's protectors and allies. Although they rarely participated in anything related to the mortal plane, they had a lot of connections. Although they weren't the guardian gods of the elves due to the existence of the elven gods, they were actually the true protectors of the forest. Many of the higher-ups in their church were wood elves. The other god was a dwarf with a red nose. His grey hair was covered in mud, and he carried a black smithing hammer on his back. The god of smithing and dwarfs, Dendel. Although he was only a powerful god, as the leader of the dwarfs, he had many allies and resources. The nature faction and the dwarven faction. From a certain standpoint, these 3 gods also represented 2 factions of power in the Order faction, 2 factions that leaned towards peace and neutrality. The 4 gods before him were all incarnations, so it was naturally impossible for them to hide from Ale's senses. But the current situation caused him to shake his head. What a pity. They're all incarnations. Do you already know? The god of holy light was the only Order main god that had come to hunt him down. Yet, he didn't move at all. It was unknown what he was thinking. The other 4 main gods didn't even send their incarnations. It was obvious that they already knew something and didn't intend to come here to die. Of course, this old man isn't here to die. We're here to see you off. Right, thank you for taking care of my little girl. The old dwarf's words were quite direct. The goddess of hammers and wine barrels, Mary, was the guardian god of the shield dwarfs. She was also one of Ale's supporters. In a way, she was the bridge between the dwarven gods and Ale. And now that Mary had chosen to enter the Hades, certain things had come to light. Mr. Ale, thank you for taking care of us sisters. Mr. The joy and laughter sisters came over with smiles on their faces. The older sister waved her handkerchief in farewell, while the younger sister ran around in joy. No matter how one looked at it, it seemed like they were sending Roland off. This was why Ale sighed at how pitiful it was. But since the information that Ale was undefeatable by the river Styx had spread, it was to be expected that he would receive such a result. Ale wasn't too worried about this. That's right, Ale was undefeatable by the river Styx. This was a fact that had already been written into the foundational laws of the world. And as long as the source of order had basic logical reasoning abilities, it wouldn't allow a main god-level existence to come here to die. Ale's undefeatable status came with a price. Just like other order gods, Ale was naturally limited by his divine concepts even though he had obtained them. As Ale was the first to die, he broke the boundaries between life and death. That was why Order loathed him. Since Ale had lost the most basic ability to evolve and desire, he became an undead that couldn't be changed. Naturally, Chaos didn't like him either. This was the same for the undead in this world. The Order faction viewed them as mortal enemies, but the Chaos faction also viewed them as somewhat useful cannon fodder. They were stuck between 2 factions, struggling to survive. In fact, they were even rejected by the dimensional laws of the world, which was quite difficult for them. However, this also meant that Ale was a third party that both sides could accept. And so, the important responsibility of guarding the river Styx was thrown onto Ale's shoulders. After all, no matter which faction controlled the river Styx, Ael's enemies wouldn't be able to feel at ease. This was different from the river Styx's counterpart, the Heaven's Pillar. The Heaven's Pillar wasn't even a passageway that actually existed. Rather than saying that one believed in a true God and obtained the God's permission to enter a divine kingdom, it was more accurate to say that it was a law for souls that had already been marked by a God to reach the recipient. Every believer of a God would have a special mark on their soul after obtaining the divine kingdom's permission. This was a basic law, and the closer a believer was to a God, the more obvious the mark would be. That believer would also receive more attention from the gods. In fact, the believer might even become a god's representative in the mortal world and become Valkyrie after death. However, the river Styx was different. It was a passageway of chaos. How could something like law possibly exist? This river Styx passed through countless planes, but the vast majority of them were lower planes that belonged to the Chaos faction. Souls that weren't guided by the Order God would all fall into the river Styx, and when they were attracted by the order of a certain Chaos plane, they would climb up and become new life forms. Since they had come ashore in the lower planes, they would naturally become the residents of those lower planes, demons and devils. It could be said that the river Styx was the cradle of demons and devils. However, nobody knew just how many souls existed in the river Styx. After all, no matter when you looked at the river Styx, you would always see that it was filled with souls. However, not many existences actually knew that the river Styx also flowed through certain upper planes. It was just that at that time, it would either be as beautiful as a dazzling galaxy, or simply transform into a rainbow-colored rainbow bridge. Back when Ael brought Roland to the underground world, they even appeared in an underground riverbed in a cave. And if the Divine Kingdom didn't receive enough souls in recent years, there would be a huge gap between the total number of souls in the Chaos faction and the Order faction. The natural laws of the upper planes would be slightly changed, and souls would be attracted by the natural laws of heaven and the Divine Kingdom. New creatures from the heavens would also be born because of this. Of course, if the Divine Kingdom was overcrowded, the birth rate of demons and devils would also secretly increase. Since climbing out of the river Styx represented the reincarnation and rebirth of a blank soul, it was only natural that one could become an angel or a devil. Of course, this couldn't be told to mortals. Angels and demons being born in the same way would not only affect the believer's devoutness, just the second possibility of entering a divine kingdom apart from the church's approval would make it difficult for the church's atonement scrolls and donation scrolls to be sold. Actually, not only did the mortal Roland not know about this, most of the new gods in this generation didn't know that the river Styx actually had a second function. In the eyes of mortals, as long as the river Styx didn't exist, the demons and devils would have countless descendants. The Chaos Abyss would also have endless potential for war. And the river Styx's hidden function as a balance valve for the Holy War would periodically harvest souls as wheat. It could be said that the river Styx was the most important part of the cycle of reincarnation, as well as the weakest part. After all, the river Styx flowed for far too long a distance. Even though Ael himself was incredibly dangerous, as long as a certain part of the river Styx was blocked, it would naturally cause problems for the entire river Styx. That was why Ael needed a guardian that both sides could accept. And so, Ael became a part of the river Styx and the cycle of reincarnation. As long as someone could possibly cause harm to the river Styx and the cycle of reincarnation, his true body would instantly descend. And now, Ael would be strengthened by the river Styx, order, and chaos, becoming the scariest existence in the world. The Order main gods that attempted to destroy the river Styx had already used their lives to prove this fact. This was also why Roland had to die once back in the day. Anyone who touched the river Styx would definitely fall into the river Styx. This was the most basic rule in the world, and it was a duty that Ael had to fulfill. There's a loophole in your plan. Yes, there's a huge loophole. If we don't fix it, this entire plan will be nothing but empty talk. That day at the river Styx, Roland seemed to agree on the existence of this loophole from their conversation. However, they both knew what was going on, but didn't investigate further. That's right, that loophole was Ael himself, the river Styx's guardian. If Ale wanted to create a new cycle of reincarnation, he would naturally have to destroy the previous cycle of reincarnation and allow his soul to enter a new cycle of reincarnation. Otherwise, everything would be nothing but empty talk. And it was obviously impossible to defeat the undefeatable river Styx's guardian, Ale. At the very least, Roland couldn't think of any way to defeat him. At the time, it was impossible for him to use main god combat strength. Not to mention, Ale was someone that even a main god wouldn't be able to face. Ale had the entire cycle of reincarnation as his support and replenishment. At the time, Roland came up with an absurd conclusion. If he wanted to stop the cycle of reincarnation, he would have to defeat Ale. If he wanted to defeat Ale, he would have to first stop the cycle of reincarnation. This was obviously an endless loop. If I can't defeat him, I'll try to talk things out. That was why Roland sought out Ale. In order to realize this absurd plan, he would need to obtain Ale's approval so that Ale would no longer carry out his duty as the river Styx's guardian. Making a true god give up or even destroy his own duty would be the equivalent of, "Is it time?" That's right, it's time for the river Styx, which is as ancient as this world, to change direction. It's time for everything to start anew. Chapter 452. The black rose petals scattered with the wind, and what fell was the sparkling and translucent golden splendor. In just an instant, the incarnation of the holy light died, even though it was a powerful incarnation capable of fighting against a main god. Ale's snow-white robe and the boat on the river Styx simply stood there. This scene gave off an indescribable feeling of age, yet also made people feel sorrow and vicissitudes from the bottom of their hearts. The river Styx was still flowing quietly in front of me, just like countless eons ago. At that time, right after the mortal plane of Ike was formed, the creator goddess of Chaos daughters vanished without a trace. And after the new mortal plane was formed, a ecosphere with the new plane as its core was naturally formed. If one had to make an analogy, one could use the solar system as an example. Aishi was Earth, which had the most complete natural cycle and was the most suitable for life to live in. Meanwhile, the lower planes, elemental planes, and upper planes were planets such as the Moon and Mars. Of course, the core of this ecosphere was the hardest currency in all the planes' souls. Unlike star systems that didn't have boundaries, when many planes were connected to each other to a certain degree, the dimensional walls would evolve into dimensional crystal walls, which would block off spying and probing from the outside world. Only existences at the level of a dimensional ruler would be able to affect other planes in any way. However, this newly born mortal plane represented a tremendous amount of soul resources and newly created dimensional laws. The former was the hard currency for traveling across dimensions, while the latter was an important resource for strengthening the plane. A newly born mortal plane without dimensional walls or dimensional lords would be no different from a noob computer without a firewall. Countless dimensional invaders and marauders would swarm into this new mortal plane. This was a path that every new mortal plane had to take. In fact, dimensional merchants even called it the infant baptism of a new mortal plane. Only those that can survive the baptism will be able to evolve from the many planes it was formed from, and be called a mature dimensional crystal wall. Those that can't, will naturally become nutrients for other dimensional crystal walls. In the very beginning, Aishi's abundant dimensional resources and weak dimensional laws attracted countless invaders. But thanks to the two goddesses of order and the Gold Tribe's hard work, Aishi's mortal plane managed to survive its most difficult initial period. The invaders' strength also caused countless gold species to perish. It wasn't without reason that the goddesses of order and chaos pursued a powerful and efficient society. It was an instinctive reaction when faced with a tremendous threat. Among the 7 calamities of Aishi, between the 4th calamity, Return of the Demons, and the 6th calamity, Chaotic War of the Gods, there was still the 5th calamity, Otherworld Descent. In reality, it was just some seeds left behind in the past that had been revived. Sporadically, some of their own kind were summoned, but they brought far more trouble to all living beings than the demons. From a certain standpoint, these seeds of sudden awakening were actually reminding the players and gods in the mortal plane not to ignore their existence. However, it was evident that nobody took this seriously. The sixth calamity returned to the main theme of the Holy War. As a result, in the seventh calamity, the final calamity, they viciously made their presence known once again. But this time, it was the final ending. The seventh calamity, which was also the final calamity. The two goddesses of order and chaos have revived and reenacted ancient myths. The gods have directly started a war in the mortal plane. The Ashi continent has been torn apart over and over again, and numerous dimensional doors have been opened. Powerful otherworld species have completely transformed this world into a living hell. As for whether or not there's an eighth calamity, that's no longer important now that the world has been sliced into more than 3,000 pieces. Original quote from Chapter 25. It could be said that the destruction of the world of Ashi was personally caused by the goddesses of order and chaos. At the very least, only the goddesses of order and chaos, who were half the rulers of the mortal plane, had done more to completely destroy the world's dimensional walls. However, the otherworld species had also contributed greatly. Wherever these dimensional locusts passed through, there would be nothing left. It could be said that unlike Roland, who only slightly understood the situation, Aelle had seen far more since he had come from the immemorial era. How could he not know about the so-called Order faction's great profit? In Roland's Armageddon ending, the seemingly illogical otherworld creatures gave him a tremendous sense of danger. Since Roland was limited in his knowledge, he didn't care about what would happen after the seventh calamity. However, Aelle saw a tremendous danger ahead. He didn't tell anyone else about this, nor did he need to. He had long since realized that no matter what enemies he would meet in the future, he would just have to face them calmly. It was best not to say such depressing things out loud. It's still this river Styx. In the earliest years of Ike, the river Styx contained countless hopes. It was the home of countless souls and the cradle of newborns. Although the lives of the people in Ike were also quite difficult, the number of souls in the mortal plane had increased exponentially. This doubtlessly meant that this was a new mortal plane that was flourishing. Out of the four elements, souls were the foundational and most important resource of the entire mortal plane. Souls could create powerful individuals and provide the power of belief. A sufficient number of souls was also an indicator of whether a mortal plane was healthy or not. Only Aelle knew that in recent years, the number of souls in this river Styx had been slowly decreasing. The entire mortal plane's protective crystal walls were constantly weakening, which meant that Roland's prophecy was likely to come true. The reason? Apart from the two-dimensional rulers who were about to awaken and whose appetites were only getting better and better as they furiously devoured soul shards, who else could it be? Aelle was quite sentimental towards the two goddesses of order and chaos. But this time, he felt that they were wrong. Mortals aren't domesticated animals. Even if there are parents who gave birth to us, there's no reason for us to become their food. No, if they were truly respectable parents, why would they give such a cruel order? After all, there's no parent who doesn't love their own children. Roland's angry roar echoed in his ears. Aelle played with the black rose in his hand as he stood in the river Styx. He couldn't help but recall the oath that Roland had sworn by the river Styx, a death oath that had been engraved into the deepest depths of his soul. I swear that I shall shoulder all my sins, reverse karma, change fate, and allow all living beings to safely survive this calamity. Finally, Aelle raised his head. All right, Roland, I'll believe you just this once. I'm betting all of my chips on you. Please don't disappoint me. The petals of the black rose began to scatter. Looking up at the petals that were blown into the air by the wind, the sunlight actually shone into the abyss. Aya, who usually had a cold expression on his face, was stunned for a moment before revealing a rare smile. Tomorrow, my hometown's Shenrue Mountains should have a sunny day again. I should go back and take a look first. The final rose was blown away by the wind. The entire river Styx's surface was now filled with floating petals. The entire river Styx stopped flowing, and the small boat on the river lost its pilot and quietly stopped. Aelle's final words, which were left behind, were some unimportant complaints. Perhaps he had been suppressing his dissatisfaction for a very long time. Mother Goddess, Sister Cynthia, perhaps we were all born because of you, but you don't have the right to have us die because of you. Perhaps the lives of mortals aren't important to you, but they're all doing their best to survive. That seemingly light weight of their souls is their everything. The river Styx didn't stop flowing for very long. When it started flowing again, the dwarfs and the nature gods watched on as it mysteriously changed directions and entered an unknown void. Even though they already knew this was the expected result, the more ancient the existences were, the more astonished they felt as they watched the river Styx, which had remained unchanged for thousands of years, enter an unknown void. What shocked them even more was that the white-robed Grim Reaper on the small boat had turned into quicksand and was blown away by the wind. Then, the small boat that he left behind sailed into the pitch-black abyss. At this moment, all living beings stared in astonishment at the sky. Even though they didn't know what had happened, they instinctively felt sorrow and despair. The meteors falling from the sky actually covered half the sky. The gods are dead. The most ancient gods are dead. The death god who represents death itself is dead. The current god of law, who represented justice, began to show favoritism. The current god of holy light, who represented purification and purity, began to mix impurities. What would be the result? Death. The current goddess of order chose to compromise with chaos. What would be the result if the goddess of chaos decided to use all sorts of rules to limit herself? Death. What would be the result if the guardian of the river Styx decided to destroy the river Styx's normality? What would be the result if the god who represented death and eternity decided to destroy the eternal sleep of death for the living? Death. The undefeatable death god had already become a part of the river Styx. He was now a part of the cycle of reincarnation. And the moment that he decided to change the cycle of reincarnation, he became the destroyer of the cycle of reincarnation's order. Since he was the guardian of the cycle of reincarnation, he had to fulfill his duty as the guardian of the cycle of reincarnation. Due to this conflict, the only option left was to remove the conflict from the cycle of reincarnation. Please die, because all living beings need salvation. The crazy Lich Roland, who always cracked ridiculous jokes, had a heavy expression when he first met the death god by the river Styx. He lowered his head and begged for the death god's death. This was also the first and only time in his entire life that he had ever lowered his head. He didn't lie, because lying was meaningless to him. He didn't praise, because glory was meaningless to him. He didn't beg, because other people's attitudes were meaningless to him. He didn't hesitate, because this was the only way out. That's right, such a cruel reality, such a despicable request. Please die for the sake of all living beings. Please die for the sake of all living beings. For the world you love to have a glimmer of hope, please die. Formless evil intent transformed into the most despicable of words. Even Roland himself felt that he was being far too despicable and selfish by asking others to die so that he could survive. But if time could be reversed, he would still make the same choice. That was because he had no other choice. Back then, Ale didn't respond. Later on, Roland kept pushing Ale to choose death in order to make his plan more and more feasible. Perhaps Ale had already made his choice from the moment that he didn't immediately kill the Lich who spoke so arrogantly by the river Styx. It's time. The old cycle of reincarnation shall collapse, it's time. We've waited half our lives for this moment, the moment when the new cycle of reincarnation will be established. Ale's final exclamation was the same as Roland's angry roar on the battlefield. In the world of the Hades, the dimensional portal that suddenly opened up and the drop of river Styx's water into this world was the best explanation. Every drop of river Styx's water directly seeped into the land of the undead, transforming the soul world's illusion into reality. However, the river Styx's water was highly toxic to all other life forms, yet it was the nutrition that the undead desperately needed. The undead crawled out of the river Styx. The newly born undead country received the nourishment of the river Styx and became a part of the cycle of reincarnation. It became more and more alive as it truly walked towards reality. Currently, Roland was in a terrible situation. When the undead army before him displayed their undying bodies, all hostile gazes were directed at him. Everyone knew that no matter how ridiculous a soul world's characteristics were, the death of the soul world's user would naturally cause the entire soul world to vanish. And no matter how powerful the Hades before them was, it was still Roland's soul world. The Devil Lord that represented lies was blocked by Holy Light's incarnation. Amidst the Chaos War God unhesitatingly charged towards Roland after he swore to kill Roland. The battle below was still as fierce as ever. The entire battlefield was torn apart by Roland's charge. The Chaos War God's heavy sword was already quite close to Roland. However, Roland didn't even look at the incoming threat. He simply quietly looked at the white ice crystal floating before him. The white ice crystal was glowing with a black light. This wasn't a beautiful gem, but it mysteriously attracted everyone's attention. This ice crystal had just arrived together with the river Styx's water. This ice crystal was the final foundation that the Hades of Hades lacked. Roland opened the book in his hand. 2 other ice crystals stuck between the pages of the book floated up as well. The blue ice crystal was still emanating traces of coldness. For the sake of your husband's revival, Alos, you must die. Roland muttered this as he returned to the day he made his decision. I've really gone too far. Back then, I had forced Alos to the brink of death in such a manner. I could only smile wryly as I lightly touched the ice crystal that had been dyed blue by Roland's soul. Compared to Alos, who had sacrificed everything for the sake of love, I seemed far too despicable. I was currently holding the blue god equipment bottle that had been filled together with the river Styx's water. Currently, it was overflowing with the divine power of the ocean. The waves and anger around it seemed to be venting a certain god's dissatisfaction and hatred. Meanwhile, the other ice crystal was still glowing gold as it floated in midair. It was like a sun that dispelled the darkness around it. However, it wasn't as blinding as the light bulb in the sky. Holy Light must be saved. That's why Estrada must die. I touched the ice crystal, but there were no tears of weakness in his eyes. The war hammer on my back was faintly resonating with me, as if it was comforting me not to think too much. But right now, I didn't dare to think too much. I no longer had any time left. The death god's soul contained far too much power of death. The white ice crystal had already been dyed black. In just a short few minutes, cracks had already appeared on it. Unlike other souls, Ales' soul was far too powerful. I needed to complete the ritual before the ice crystal shattered. Everyone needs to be saved. The cycle of reincarnation must be ended. That's why Ale must die. 3 ice crystals surrounded me as a dim, 3-colored light distorted the entire world. The prelude was over. Far too many people had been sacrificed and lost on this journey. It was time for us to complete our dream. It was time to change the fates of everyone's inevitable destruction. At the very least, we needed to make their sacrifices worthwhile. Imperceptibly, a masked silver-robed individual was standing behind me. He had descended together with the other gods, but he had remained abnormally silent this entire time. Currently, he was wearing a faceless mask and was constantly trembling as if he was laughing maniacally. He faced the Chaos War God's charge. He suddenly pulled off his mask to reveal the skeleton Licker's true appearance. The moment he ascended to godhood was the skeleton Licker's true appearance for eternity. All illusions became reality at this moment. The last piece of blank ice crystal appeared in front of him. My voice resonated with his, and our faces became the same. All sinners shall be judged. All God's laws shall become the norm of this world. That's why, Wumianzi Roland must die. Chapter 453. We don't accept order. The meteors didn't just bring reinforcements. They also destroyed the order of the cycle of reincarnation and caused a large number of gods to defect. This doubtlessly offended the source of order. The source of order wouldn't possibly let these traitors off so easily. Otherwise, the order it emphasized would lose its most basic dignity. We deny chaos. The distorted void brought with it an envoy of despair. This was an avenger from the chaos abyss. The will of the chaos abyss's angry roar caused the entire bottomless chaos abyss to tremble. Countless demons were devoured by the chaos abyss in despair. The fact that the river Styx had changed its direction was a fatal blow to the chaos faction. The chaos abyss would suffer the most from this. Even if the river Styx didn't completely dry up in a short period of time, it was likely that the production rate of all demon planes would drastically decrease. Every top-level combat strength would be greatly reduced. Even if the Chaos faction lured high-quality souls from the mortal plane into the Chaos Abyss, it would be far less effective than before. With the Chaos faction's usual style, it would be inconceivable that they would let the culprits go with such a deep hatred. Not long after the gods from the Hades arrived, new reinforcements entered the Hades. Since Ale cut off all communication with the Chaos Abyss, these reinforcements would have to mentally prepare themselves that they wouldn't be able to return before they completed their master's orders. We shall create the hell of the Hades for all living creatures. Perhaps it would be more accurate to say that they were mentally prepared to fight for several years, several decades, or even several centuries. The meteors and distorted spatial tears brought reinforcements from both factions. There weren't many reinforcements. After all, for the Hades, small fries were meaningless. That was why even though there weren't many reinforcements, every single one of them was a famous major character. The white-robed old man had a long white beard that reached the ground. His smiling eyes seemed quite friendly. Rather than calling him a mage, it would be more accurate to call him a neighbor's old man. Calamanders was a main god. His divine concepts included wisdom, books, courage, dawn, statues, crafts, and so on. He was an incredibly ancient god of personality, ancient to the point that very few people knew how he became a god. It was said that he was the sole survivor of a certain ancient civilization. If the source of order still had so-called emotions, it would probably be infuriated right now. I never expected that it would send a main god after me, not to mention that it was the god of wisdom, Calamanders. He was one of the few gods that mags would worship. Although his faith wasn't necessarily that pious, and most of it was so that he wouldn't fall into the river Styx after his death, the fact that he was recognized by mags and mags meant that he was wise and open-minded. I hadn't expected that he would be the pursuer. No, I should say that I hadn't expected that the Order faction would send out a main god. After all, there were only 5 main gods left in the Chaos faction. And of the main gods of Order. If I sent of gods, how, and faction sent out the gods. Gods, how, and how if they were to calculate the gains and losses according to normal and mechanical logic, the Order faction should be gritting their teeth and swallowing their pride. But soon, I understood everything as I watched the 2 demon lords directly greet Calamanders as they walked out of the distorted void. We actually forced the Chaos Abyss to communicate with the source of order. It would seem that we've done a good job. It was obvious that the source of order would be able to accept having 2 reinforcements and 1 reinforcements from the Chaos faction. But, forcing the Chaos Abyss, no, forcing Cynthia to voluntarily take a loss, it would seem that she was truly infuriated this time. I didn't know how well Ale had completed his mission, or whether he had successfully changed the direction of all the river Styx's water. The possibility was quite low. But, just changing a portion of the river Styx's water was enough to shatter Cynthia's beautiful dream of being revived in this holy war. It was only natural that she would be furious. These 2 reinforcements from the Chaos Abyss both had the stench of sulfur on them. It was evident that they were residents of the lower planes. Just by comparing their information, I was able to determine their identities. Ka was a gigantic piece of rotting flesh. His disgusting green fur and smell reminded me of a fermented garbage dump. His surroundings had the strange smell of rotting food and corpses. Even though he was clearly a demon lord, it was impossible to see his face and limbs. In fact, it was impossible to even see his eyes. Ka, the turbid nightmare. He's a demon without a noble title. He's the closest demon lord to an undead creature. He was originally a product of a common bloody battle between demons. He was a combination of some half-dead demons and corpses, yet he survived. Nobody knows how he became a top-level demon, just like how nobody knows how to kill him. In fact, nobody even knows if he can speak or if he's truly alive. Of course I had heard of this name before. This demon lord completely fit the definition of an evolved chaos demon. However, the will of the Chaos Abyss hated this demon lord to the point that he didn't even have a noble title. In fact, even his name came from the sound of his stomach churning. Unlike Ka, who made me feel uncomfortable just looking at him, The other demon lord was much more pleasing to the eye. Ka was only in the form of an ordinary demon. He had 2 wings, 2 horns, and a dark grey body that was quite fit. He had hands and feet, and he carried a great sword on his back. He appeared quite ordinary. I couldn't recall his name for a moment, but fortunately, I had little Tears who was an expert in the lower planes. Sophocles the Deceiver. He's the most unfathomable demon lord. He loves to tempt mortal warriors and powerful individuals to fall into depravity. He's the best at arranging people's fates and tragedies. I've always felt that he's more suitable for the title of King of Lies than I am. Alright then, this made sense. In terms of damage and hatred towards the mortal plane, this demon main god who was skilled in art and opera was definitely in the top 3. Sophocles' most famous deed was that he had once created his own evil cult in the mortal plane and successfully made his incarnation a true god. This demon lord actually succeeded in becoming a true god, and even allied with many true gods. This was a huge humiliation for the order gods. Sophocles and his believers were still the public enemies of all the true gods' churches. However, considering that demons were unlikely to be able to strengthen themselves with faith, Sophocles could only be happy that he did such a thing. Spending so much effort to please me, should I say that it was to be expected of a chaos demon lord? I never expected that such a dangerous existence would have such an ordinary appearance. But when considering Sophocles' abilities to deceive true gods, perhaps such an appearance would be more suitable for him to perform. Currently, there were now 5 chaos main gods on the battlefield of the Haid. Considering the fact that the chaos main gods were generally arrogant and unbridled, coupled with their selfish temperament of not willing to take risks without any benefits, sending 5 chaos main gods at once wasn't just Cynthia's full effort. She would also have to pay an additional price. In that case, the scale of the Holy War in Aeshi's main battlefield will be much smaller. That's really good news. No, I can't be happy so soon. It's not yet time for the chaos main gods to appear. For ordinary humans, those low-level demons are already the scariest nightmare. And right now, even though I was facing the inevitable backlash from the Order and Chaos main gods, even though I was facing 2 Order main gods and 5 Chaos main gods, I didn't panic or feel nervous at all. Instead, I felt joy and excitement from the bottom of my heart. That's exactly how it should be. If we can't even make the Order and Chaos main gods feel enmity towards us, then what's the point of all our hard work and sacrifices? My enemy's strength only made me happy. This wasn't because I was insane. It was because we had gone through so much trouble to prepare for this war and made so many sacrifices. How could we possibly be afraid of our enemy's strength? It was the opposite. Our enemy's attention and enmity meant that we were on the correct path. Right now, the Chaos War god was right in front of me, but he was forcefully forced back by my silver chains. Together with the 4 Chaos Towers, the dimensional wall that represented the birth of a new world also rose up. That's right, 4 Chaos Towers. Around the silver tower that Wu Mianzhi and I were standing on, there were 3 other towers rising up. The 4 Elements Creation Forbidden spell had already been fully activated. The White Tower was the product of gathering ice. It was the Tower of Life in the Hell of Hades. At the top of the tower was a statue of a goddess with the original water elemental god Alo's soul crystal as its core. White light was currently shining upon her citizens, giving the dead endless life force. The Black Tower was the product of gathering death. It was the Tower of Soul in the Hell of Hades. In the crystal skull at the top of the tower, Ale's soul crystal was glowing ominously as the power of death was being nurtured. The Golden Tower was the product of gathering holy light. It was the Tower of Time in the Hell of Hades. It was the only pure light in hell. Although the power of holy light was still gathering, Estrada's soul crystal was currently glowing with the light of salvation within the statue of the lamplighter. Although the silver tower under my feet seemed rather dim since it hadn't been activated yet, it was doubtlessly the final piece of the puzzle for the 4 Elements creation, the Tower of Law. In the creation of the 4 elements, they were the most important core and cornerstone. All changes would revolve around them. In ancient creation myths, the 4 elemental tower had also appeared before, but it was unknown to the world. The elemental throne from the 4 elemental planes. Aishi was truly ridiculously powerful back in the day. But to me, this truly is the strongest mage tower in the world. That's right, the 4 elemental thrones that gave birth to the elemental gods weren't natural creations. They were products left behind by Aishi after he created the world. They were a part of the 4 elements creation, and they were also the controllers of balance between Aishi's plane and the 4 elemental planes. The relationship between the elemental gods, who were capable of controlling the power of the entire elemental plane, and the elemental thrones, was similar to that between mags and mage towers. And right now, the 4 elemental towers were the natural mage towers that could give me endless power. With their help, how could I possibly fear any opponent? Chapter 454. In the first year of Foot, Dawn Era, the eternal holy war between order and chaos met with a new challenge. When the river Styx's reincarnation water flowed into an unknown territory, the entire world's cycle of reincarnation was broken. This wasn't an adjective used to describe the destruction of the old order. Instead, it was a literal meaning. The flow of the river Styx was the binding of souls. And when that binding was broken, countless souls obtained freedom. Those who died in battle from the first year of the Dawn Era to the 4th year of Foot were the lucky ones. The old cycle of reincarnation was broken, and the new cycle of reincarnation hadn't matured yet. They broke free of the river Styx's binding, and many souls directly reincarnated, skipping the so-called mystery of being in the womb. The lucky ones who successfully reincarnated with their memories and the experience of 2 lives stood at the peak of all other lives. But those who died in battle in those years were the unluckiest. Although the river Styx was the binding of souls, it was also a protective mechanism for weak souls who had lost their physical bodies and lives. Without the protection of the river Styx, even the strongest and luckiest souls would be able to successfully reincarnate. Although it was impossible to calculate the survival rate, when considering the tremendous number of people who died in battle, the later generations would calculate the success rate of reincarnation to be less than 1%. In the end, the lucky ones who successfully reincarnated would have too much contact with other memory fragments in the cycle of reincarnation. They would also have to face the splitting of their souls and multiple personalities caused by their mixed memories. In the end, only less than 1 out of 10 heaven-blessed individuals would be able to obtain their true self. And since there was a bug in the system, there would be those lucky or unlucky beneficiaries of the bug. Naturally, there would also be cheaters who would take advantage of the bug. The fastest and most ruthless were the Ale faction, or perhaps it should be called the Hades faction now. After all, they were the ones who actively created this bug. With Roland's usual style, how could he possibly miss such a good opportunity? Everything had been planned from the very beginning. Along with the fall of the Divine Kingdom, the Valkyrie Palace and God's envoys, these powerful souls of heroes also had to make a choice. After all, the Valkyrie Palace itself was a product of the Order faction's origin of Order. Without the Order faction's support, it would be even more difficult for ordinary gods to support Valkyrie. They have 2 choices. One is to perish together with the Divine Kingdom in the underworld and become a member of the underworld as the dead. However, it's easy to enter, but difficult to leave. The other choice is to take advantage of the fact that the hole in the cycle of reincarnation has yet to be mended and reincarnate. Yes, this was the loophole that Roland and the others exploited. This loophole that Roland and the special form of undead. From a soul, Valkyrie could choose to reincarnate. Unlike those who reincarnated naturally, who had an extremely low probability of retaining the memories of 2 lives, the souls of heroes weren't so fragile. The Valkyrie body created for heroic souls would also allow them to maintain the integrity of their souls in the cycle of reincarnation. The success rate of their reincarnation was 100%. And these newborns who were destined to grow up in the Holy War would possess the experiences, memories, and techniques of heroes, as well as a complete physical body with the ability to evolve. As long as they didn't die on the path of growth, they were destined to go even further in their previous lives. Of course, entering the cycle of reincarnation would mean starting all over again. The conflict between the new personality and the original personality would be unavoidable. Before they awakened to become heroes, they still had a long way to go. But after these seeds of heroes were scattered all over the world, they were destined to sprout and grow in the Holy War. Perhaps this can make up for the lack of players, of the lack of backup combat strength in the mortal plane. You see, for mortals who are suffering, perhaps your neighbor is a famous emperor in history, or a great dragon slayer who vanquished demons. Since these heroes have become mortals once again, they will naturally fight for the mortals' future. A single hero can protect an entire town, turn the tide of a battle, and can even lead a team. They're far more useful than Valkyrie, who can only act as a hired thug and whose strength has stagnated. Roland used such words to convince the gods of the Hades to give his Valkyrie and god envoys the right to choose, allowing these seeds of heroes, who would later be known as the heavenly bestowers, to enter the cycle of reincarnation. And when the other true gods understood what the gods of the Hades were doing and began to follow suit, the new cycle of reincarnation had already begun to mend its loopholes. Not many followed the previous cycle of reincarnation. This casual action of the gods of the Hades was destined to have far-reaching effects. After all, compared to the player heroes in the game's history that needed to grow, these existences that had already been proven to have great achievements in history had the ability to start all over again. No matter if it was in terms of willpower or personal ability, these existences were far more skilled at cheating than the players who reincarnated to play games. For example, if someone like Longtu were to enter the cycle of reincarnation again, perhaps in just a few decades, the dragons would be in deep trouble. A single hero would represent an entire generation. When the generations that followed had countless heroes, it would seem that some things were destined to change. More than 10 divine kingdoms fell into the plane of Hades, but not all of them entered the plane of Hades. Instead, they wandered around the plane. After all, the plane of Hades was a country of the dead. How could there be a place for the living? When that plane fully matured, existences that weren't powerful enough to break free from the dimensional laws of the plane would also become the dead. This included gods that were below the level of main gods. If these gods left their divine kingdoms in the hell of Hades, the corrosive dimensional laws of death would transform them into a part of the plane of Hades. The gods of the kingdom of the dead can only be gods that are already dead. Of course, there were those who avoided the impending change of life and death, and there were also those who chose to accept the change and become the gods of Hades. The god of fate's divine kingdom had already seeped into the earth. As one of the top-ranked gods of Hades, he had already chosen to become a member and the backbone of the Hades. The god of dwarfs Mary's divine kingdom was also docked in this territory. She also had to fulfill her promise with Ale and become the protector of the Hades. The other 3 gods who had made the same choice as them were also about to take their jobs as promised. But even those who didn't bring their divine kingdoms to the Hades would become members of the entire Hades pantheon. However, their belonging would not be limited to the Hell of Hades. At the top of the Hell of Hades, the gods' divine kingdoms were merging together. A paradise was taking shape in the void. This new divine kingdom would be built according to the paradise for the sinners of the divine law. These gods would also become the embryonic form of the heaven of Hades. Between the newly formed heaven and hell was more than just the void. With a part of the Ghostwind Plains as the core, the original titans and supreme immemorial dragons were busy working. Since they were able to survive across dimensions, they were naturally the strongest existences in the world. But right now, they were nothing more than hard-working construction workers. Some of them were busy marking the shattered Earth with new dimensional markings so that it would be easier for them to migrate. Some were helping to reassemble the shattered pieces of the new world. Some were traveling back and forth, drawing dimensional coordinates. Some were providing protection for the fragile ordinary lives. For the future of themselves and their people, they were incredibly busy. And when the gods of heaven stabilized, they would also provide them with helpers. In Roland's blueprint, the Hell of Hades was a 3-level design. The topmost heaven of Hades would become the residence of the gods and the sinners. The middle land of Spring would become a world for mortals and animals. The titans and dragons would become its guardians. And the bottom would naturally be the most important part, the Hell of Hades. With the help of the 4 elemental towers, the Hell of Hades and the Hell of Hades would receive at least one amount of nourishment and supply, while the Hell of Hades would receive at least one amount. After all, The other two hell planes were only temporary supporting Hell of Hades. They were only temporary facilities to allow Hell of Hades to function normally. The true supporting world for Hell of Hades would only be the entire world of Aeshi. In that case, the Hell of Hades would naturally be more than 100 times larger and more powerful than the other two hell planes. Now, a large amount of the river Styx was bringing souls into the Hades. A new cycle of reincarnation needed to be activated. The Hell of Hades needed to be officially activated. We no longer had any path of retreat. And, our enemies also had no path of retreat. The Hell of Hades had already been torn apart. Leaving this hell would be equivalent to voluntarily jumping into the void. The survival rate would probably start from 3 decimal places. And once the Hell of Hades was formed, the entire world would be affected by the law of death. Even if main god existences were able to survive in any hell plane, including the Hades, it would be inevitable that their power levels would be affected by the law of death. Meanwhile, the subordinates and armies that they summoned would definitely have to stay in the Hades forever. From their perspective, the best outcome for them would naturally be to destroy us and then occupy this broken hell plane. They would then wait for the 2 major factions to rediscover the coordinates of this broken hell plane and bring them back. Then, they would ask for rewards from the 2 major factions. But, since they were willing to take the risk to come here, they would definitely have considered such a difficult situation. The final result was obvious: when enemies met on a narrow path, only the courageous would emerge victorious. The horn to charge sounded. Numerous dimensional doors opened. However, this time, it wasn't our enemies who came out. One by one, Valkyrie walked out from the dimensional doors. The Night Tower and the White Tower both shone brilliantly. The aura of the Netherworld gave these undead even greater power, while the power of ice gave them powerful physical bodies. That's right, the Valkyrie of the Hades gods now had 2 major choices. The first choice was to enter the cycle of reincarnation and start all over again. The second choice was to become a member of the Hades and fight for the mortal world's heaven and hell. At this point, the Hades gods wouldn't hold back at all. If it wasn't for the fact that they needed to first stabilize the heaven plane, it was likely that their incarnations, which had placed most of their divine power, would have personally entered the fray as well, even if it was impossible to take back their divine power. It seems that this will be a difficult and drawn-out battle. Looking at the 3 lit-up hell towers, even though the Black Tower and White Tower had already played an important role in this battle, I still wasn't satisfied. In front of a main god, the Valkyrie gods would only need a single slash to kill them. Even if they could revive, would an infinitely revived and be able to kill a Tyrannosaurus Rex? As for the Golden Tower represented by Holy Light, it was actually the same as time. It was the most critical coordinate system, representing the order in which all things existed. To put it in simpler terms, it represented a type of direction, the direction in which things constantly advanced. Humans would grow old, machines would age, and it would be impossible to reverse time. This was how time felt to mortals. No matter if they were happy or sad, mortals would indeed advance in time. And in the Hell of Hades, Holy Light also represented a type of direction. Our Holy Light is now completely different from the God of Holy Light. Our Holy Light represents salvation. That's right, this was the direction of the Hell of Hades. Sinners would be punished in hell, while criminals would be punished in prison. Being punished and suffering wasn't the ultimate goal. Instead, the ultimate goal was to atone for one's sins and be punished in hell for the sins they had committed while they were still alive. Only then would they be able to enter the cycle of reincarnation cleanly. This would also serve as a warning to mortals to do good in the mortal world and not commit so many sins. And the direction in which the Hell of Hades operated would naturally result in the salvation of both mortals and hell's souls. This was doubtlessly an important part of the Hell of Hades. After the Hell of Hades took shape, it would be even more effective and wondrous. But now, no matter how bright you are, it won't be of any use. But on the battlefield right now, the light of salvation itself was basically useless against the main god-level existences. In fact, it wasn't even as effective as the holy light of purification from the large light bulb not far away. It would seem that I'll have to depend on the Tower of Law in the end. The silver holy tower was still silent, as if it was accumulating power. Only I knew that if salvation was the direction and goal of the Hell of Hades, then law would be the method to achieve this goal. It could be said that every corner of the future Hell of Hades would become a land of law. And the Tower of Law that was currently being lit would become the true core of the entire Hell of Hades. Wu Mianzhi, who was at the top of the tower, had finished his final preparations. The Hell of Hades was about to welcome a new chapter. Chapter 455. If there was a map capable of showing all the places in Ike where the flames of war were raging, it would probably be a completely red map. Ogres were returning, demon lords were enjoying their slaughter, low-level angels were killing machines, the elves were having a cruel and direct internal war, and the human kingdoms were fighting over profits without end. Apart from the frigid winter north, which was still relatively peaceful, the entire world was now in a state of war. This so-called holy war? It's so intoxicating. The kings desire new territories, the military officers want to use the heads of the dead to get rich and get promoted, the merchants are finally going to sell the goods they've been hoarding for so long, and even that heroic youth, doesn't he also desire to become a so-called hero? Holy war. Is this any different from past wars? Don't just look at how happy everyone is right now. Let's see how many people will be able to survive until the end of this war. The holy war was right around the corner. Bards who sang sarcastic songs were just as annoying as prophets who saw ominous things. That was because they all saw the truth, especially since countless taverns and opera houses were currently performing hymns about war and epics. Such truth was far too disappointing. However, very few mortals knew that in an unknown dimension, another war was currently taking place that would determine the fate of all mortals. No matter how cruel and powerful this war was, as well as what this war represented, this was probably the real holy war. 5 Chaos main gods and 2 Order main gods. Nearly half of the highest-level existences in the entire dimension. This seems rather difficult to deal with. Countless dimensional doors kept opening. The main gods forcefully summoned reinforcements from both sides, even if reinforcements were destined to be a one-way ticket to war and death. Those who were already fighting were still continuing, while those who weren't fighting were summoning their allies and preparing for war. They weren't only on guard against the Chaos main gods and the Hades, but also against their companions. That was because there were many grudges between the main gods, and it would be inconceivable for the Chaos main gods to not have any grudges against each other. It would be far too unjust to be killed in a small alley if they revealed a weakness. Behind me, all of the elemental towers had been lit up. My setup was nearing its end, and at the core of the Tower of Law, Wu Mianzhi was holding the original Codex of Law and loudly chanting the Proverbs of Law. That God equipment book didn't just give me the original God's law. The origin of Codex was a notebook that I used to record laws and cases. Unknowingly, it became a God equipment that represented the rules of law. That was because it represented the purest and most foundational law. And right now, another notebook was merging with it. This notebook recorded the secrets of the entire Hades. This notebook was the notebook that recorded the entire Hades project. At this moment, the 2 divine weapon grimoires were merging into one, as if they were foretelling that the future Master of Law would also become the Master of Hades. A divine item has been born. It's the Book of Hades. When that thick black-covered book was opened in the darkness of the Hades, all of its secrets were revealed. All life instinctively sensed its existence and learned its true name. This book would be the core of the Hades, as well as the symbol of the Master of Hades. The elemental flow between the 4 elemental towers had already been completed. The creation of the 4 elements had been completely activated, and the entire dimension had transformed into a newborn dimensional egg. The crystal walls protecting the newborn dimensional egg would be strong enough to face any main god's trials. At this point, with the 4 elemental towers completely awakening, our plan had already completed the first 2 stages. This battle was destined to evolve from a chaotic battle on the streets and alleyways into a dimensional invasion battle. We were the rulers of the dimension, while these invading main gods were the enemies of the dimension. After Ale made his decision, we only had 2 main god-level combat strength on our side. Not only that, we were both devil lords who only had a single power attribute. Our combat strength was obviously on the weaker side. Changing this battle in the wilderness into a siege battle that would be advantageous to the defending side was part of our plan from the very start. According to the basic rules of dimensional war, it would be quite difficult to even kill the ruler of a dimension. One would have to gradually erode the dimensional laws, lower the dimensional defenses, kill the dimensional god, and finally corrupt and kill the dimensional ruler. This was the most basic rule of this game. How could the veteran players like the Demon Lords not know what to do? From a certain standpoint, this could be viewed as a prelude to the battle between the Hades and Ashi dimensions. This could also be viewed as a prelude to the dimensional war that the world of Ashi was about to face. At this moment, all the dimensional invaders were repelled. They needed to expend power in order to maintain their own existence. The weak little demons were instantly reduced to dust as an aura of death began to spread. Since this was destined to be a battle of attrition and endurance, the Demon Lords unhesitatingly summoned even more cannon fodder. It would be impossible for the Demon Lords to personally participate before they learned the dimensional potential and dimensional laws of this dimension. Clang. Alright then, I spoke too early. I inhaled a cold breath as I looked at the heavy sword and sparks that viciously collided with the dimensional walls right in front of me. But soon, the Chaos War god unhesitatingly retreated after he noticed that his ambush had failed. He only glanced at me coldly once before he unhesitatingly retreated. Reality had already proven that our predictions were correct. The dimensional walls would still be sufficient for the time being. Of course, I unhesitatingly focused on what Wu Mianzi was currently doing, creating the Hades. The Book of Hades had already been opened, and the illusory hell of the Hades had already taken shape. The illusory image of hell that kept appearing and disappearing in midair was the blueprint for the hell of the Hades. And the first page of the book was actually a table of contents. The table of contents was the blueprint for the future hell of the Hades. 4 pillars, 4 halls, and 7 hells. Yep, this was the blueprint for the future hell. The 4 pillars, apart from representing the 4 elemental pillars, naturally also represented the 4 pillar gods of the Hades. Just like how there would definitely be elemental gods in the elemental planes, the 4 pillar gods of the Hades were the controllers of the 4 elements that created the Hades. They were the pillars of the hell of the Hades, as well as the rulers of the Hades. And Wu Mianzi, who represented the pillar of law, was naturally one of them. No, I should say that he was the most important pillar. He was one of the 4 pillar gods, the leader of the 4 halls, and the king of the 7 hells. He would become the ruler and final judge of the Hades. His importance even surpassed Ale, who was the foundation of the undead. I slowly walked over and lightly touched Wu Mianzi's silver mask with my hand. I felt rather strange. That was because from a certain standpoint, Wu Mianzi was both my clone and my child, creation. As my most unique creation, in order to ensure absolute fairness, Wu Mianzi was an existence without any sense of self or emotions. Without a sense of self, there shouldn't be any concept of existence. Yet, Wu Mianzi just happened to be recognized by everyone. This contradictory existence formed the last of the 7 original sins, the Wu Mianzi who represented sloth. Incomprehensible? Actually, it was only because of my system's reminder that I discovered that I had unknowingly completed the final creation. Just as I said when I blessed the wood spirit, in my understanding, sloth actually represented coldness and indifference. No matter how lazy a person was, they would become diligent when their life was in danger. Many times, what seemed like laziness actually had nothing to do with them. In that case, what sloth truly represented was a type of selfishness and coldness. It was a type of desireless and heartless. Passionate people would always appear diligent and meddlesome. Cold people would always be locked up in their own world. They would use all sorts of excuses to isolate themselves from the world and do nothing about the outside world. And the best example of desireless and emotionless was naturally the absolutely just Wu Mianzi. Because he had no desires, he wouldn't be biased toward others. Because he was emotionless, no matter how much the sinner deserved sympathy, judgment and punishment would always be carried out according to the law. Under the guidance of a certain existence, my split soul shards created the fairest god. This indirectly proved my previous inference: gods are also different types of undead. There are no coincidences in this world, only certainties. System, after this battle is over, I'm going to get even with you. Ha, Cavendish, just watch, this is our ace in the hole. God's descent. Time was limited, and I didn't have the time to waste on my system. I roared angrily, and my vision mysteriously changed. The Woomianzi who was currently standing in front of the Book of Hades had become me. When we fused as one, the silver robe that I was wearing and the silver mask that Woomianzi was wearing merged together once again. The weight of the gavel at my waist really made me miss it. That familiar posture of a judge made me recall the time when I was still in the underground world. However, the frightening power of law that overflowed with it had long surpassed the level of mortals. That's right, we had combined into one. This perfect reverse God's descent was my ace in the hole. Woomianzi is a true god. If all of his godly powers were to descend upon me, no matter how high our soul compatibility is, the only outcome would be an explosion. This is determined by the limits of my mortal physical body as a vessel. The overly powerful Woomianzi is unable to use God's descent on me, but I can use God's descent on Woomianzi. Since a god's will could suppress a mortal's will to complete their descent, in theory, a mortal could also use God's descent on a god's body. However, under normal circumstances, a god's instinctive resistance would cause a mortal's soul to collapse. However, Sloth Woomianzi didn't even have a sense of self, and his soul wavelength was the same as mine, so it was only natural that we would be perfectly compatible. Now, the rules of God's descent were reversed, and my will descended on Woomianzi's body. With the support of sufficient God's power, my soul world began to improve, and the concept in the Book of Hades began to become reality. Just me alone wouldn't be enough to manage the creation of the Hades plane and the ascension to godhood. That was because I didn't have enough power. Just Woomianzi alone wouldn't be enough, as he didn't have a sense of self. Only Woomianzi Roland, who had combined his physical body and soul together, would have the power to create the hell of Hades and godhood. This was also the foundational reason why Woomianzi needed to become a powerful god. It was impossible to conceal the scene before me. My soul world's user's power had greatly increased, which naturally caused the entire world to become different. This world that suddenly became alive doubtlessly caused my enemies to panic and become restless. I smiled at the Book of Hell, which was becoming ever stronger, and the panicking Hell Lords. This is only the beginning, and you're already so astonished. The highest level main god in the Aishi plane? You should know that you're about to face the highest level main god in the Hades plane, as well as the controller of the dimensional laws. This is war, a war between two planes. Chapter 456. The chaos evil god Donates was rather hesitant in the middle of the thick fog. Just a moment ago, he had been observing the enemy he had sworn to kill on the battlefield. But in the blink of an eye, he had fallen into the fog. He's able to forcefully change my location without me noticing. Even though he had experienced countless battles and faced powerful enemies from many dimensions, this abnormal scene still made him feel rather perplexed. Even though his expression didn't change at all, he couldn't help but feel rather uneasy. When facing a powerful enemy who had an advantage in power, splitting them up and then annihilating them was a common tactic. Obviously, he had been split up and was now alone. Clang. Donates didn't move. He stuck his great sword into the ground as if he had closed his eyes and entered a meditative state again. But in reality, he was using his unique combat intuition to observe the distorted world around him. But what he was waiting for wasn't reinforcements. Instead, it was the fog that was becoming thicker and thicker. He couldn't even see his own fingers when he stretched out his hand. But at some unknown time, the fog was now tainted with the scent of blood and blood. Asmo. In his mind, his heroic spirit Adekang, the fallen hero who always kept his cool and could give him wise and decisive advice at any moment, did not immediately respond to him. Instead, the reply he received was a strange roar that did not have much rationality left in it. Ah! Why can't I kill them all? Die, die. All of you, die. Due to the strange interference, the other Valkyrie members were also sending him messy messages, as if they had gone insane. And within the range of his senses, All of his subordinates had lost their sense of direction and location. Even though they could sense that they were nearby, they couldn't see or receive any response. Denotes was rather astonished. Unlike the demon lords who summoned cannon fodder to be expended, Denotes, who was known as the incarnation of war, only looked up to the truly brave. Rather than saying that there weren't any weaklings in his Valkyrie temple, it would be more accurate to say that the weaklings had already been exhausted in endless battles. The ones he had summoned to this battlefield were the elites of Valkyrie, and the experts among them were not inferior to ordinary gods. How could they be gone just like that? After entering this dimension, the fallen Valkyrie was recognized by the dimensional laws of this dimension. Not only was her Hades mist of death strengthened, she even possessed the most foundational undying nature just like her enemies. After all, this was a country of the dead to begin with. Strengthening an opponent is stupid. This was the rule. Limit the target, limit the target, limit the result. As long as all the conditions were met, there shouldn't be any difference. Unlike the rule force that could be manipulated in the outside world, under Roland's control, the Hades' rule of law carried a more rigid burden and at the same time, it also had a stronger restriction and adaptability. Since the rules have already been set, how can they be trampled on at will? If the rules of law could be changed based on someone else's identity, status, and characteristics, then what difference would it be from the original Church of the Gods? What need would there be for it to exist? Denotes didn't relax or feel lucky at all that his opponent had greatly strengthened his Valkyrie warriors. That was because Denotes knew that a soul world was the soul world that Roland desired. Ever since he entered this world, Denotes had noticed how twisted and insane this world's natural laws were. Being able to create such a world was already proof of Roland's extreme stubbornness and insanity. In this world where willpower could be transformed into actual power, the most difficult types to deal with were stubbornness and insanity. The former's extreme stubbornness would cause the natural laws of this world to become ridiculously restrictive and effective. As for the latter, nobody could predict what type of natural laws they would choose. But just dealing with them like this wasn't a solution. Finally, Denotes chose to take a step forward. The moment he took his first step, the entire world instantly distorted. This is a battlefield. That's right, it was blood red. This was a boundless red wasteland. Even the ground was dyed red with blood. Countless souls were fighting against each other in this battlefield. There were ghost knights, butchers wielding kitchen knives, and the undying Valkyrie. No matter how powerful, glorious, or undying they were all ordinary soldiers here. This was the most berserk of battles. All the souls here had lost all sense of reason. They were using sharp blades to attack each other, using their claws and teeth to tear each other apart. They would tear off their own heads and intestines and throw them at each other. Their only thought was to tear apart the enemy before them. Every moment, an army flag would be cut down along with its owner, and the next moment, an equal number of souls would rise up. Here, the strongest Valkyrie were no different from butchers. Their originally clear eyes were now filled with twisted insanity and bloodthirst. Some powerful existences were even crawling on all fours and biting each other like wild dogs. No matter if they were the venerated king or the glorious Valkyrie, they were nothing more than angry beasts driven by their instincts. Asmo, Dibba, Kari. Denotes was somewhat hesitant. He immediately saw several familiar figures, but his master's summons still hadn't received any response. These souls that had died and revived over and over again had long since lost their most basic sense of reason. At the end of the red mist, the silver-robed and masked Roland stood there, seeming to be admiring the current scene. A righteous war. A holy war to suppress evil. A war for living space. Stop joking around. Since all of you like to use various reasons to kill each other, then I'll give you a reason to kill each other here for all eternity, just like your favorite beasts. Denotes turned around and saw that his holy mage robe was currently glowing with the pure light of law. The malevolent skeleton was laughing maniacally in an evil manner. The crazed and twisted expression on its face caused even Denotes to be moved. Welcome to hell. This is the first prison, the bloodbath purgatory. Those who willfully kill, war criminals, and bloodthirsty maniacs, as well as so-called heroes, as long as they participate in war and take the lives of others, no matter what the reason, excuse, or identity is, they will all be sent to this prison. Upon seeing Donati's, Roland, who was filled with evil intentions, suddenly bowed as if he was a hospitable host. Venerated war god, please forgive me for how simple this place is. However, I feel that this bloodbath purgatory is the most suitable place to receive the war god who is the incarnation of war. Do you like it? Or perhaps you don't like the impromptu performances of your subordinates? Or perhaps you intend to personally participate? The silent incarnation of war didn't respond. His heavy sword that glowed with a murky black light was his usual answer to Donati's question. But this time, his unstoppable heavy sword met its match. Within the red mist, a gigantic creature blocked the heavy sword. When the red mist was no longer able to obstruct Donati's vision, the gigantic creature within the mist revealed its true form. Even Donati's couldn't help but suck in a cold breath. This was a terrifying gigantic creature. Its appearance was somewhat similar to that of a hellhound. Its blood-red body was like a gigantic mountain, and its gigantic tail was burning like a volcano. Its dog head was able to bite down on the war god's heavy sword. It seemed to be dissatisfied with being restricted by its master. Its 3 heads roared continuously, and its blood-red eyes were filled with the joy of cruelty and wanton slaughter. Its limbs and tail were wrapped in the demonic flames of hell, and its venomous saliva melted everything in its path. At this moment, its other 2 heads were still tearing and devouring souls. The souls that it was wantonly trampling on were the once noble Valkyrie. Even though it was restricted by its master, the incarnation of rage still couldn't stop its slaughter. Oh my small body isn't any combat personnel. The ones to entertain you will be my little cuties, Xiao Bao and Xiao Bei, Bustian, the war dog. Woof. The huge dog's roar was filled with endless rage. Even though it was facing its master, the war dog of wrath, which had entered combat mode, was still unable to control its endless rage. Alright, since you've requested it, Xiao Bei. Bustian. Yep, Xiao Bei. I got it, no need to emphasize it. Whatever you want. In the end, the war dog could only helplessly give up. However, Donati's didn't dare to underestimate the war dog. Of course, he had already recognized the war dog of wrath. But now, no matter if it was in terms of power or aura, it was completely different. Rage, war, and slaughter. At the very least, it's a powerful god. So this is its divine kingdom. Donati's could sense that this gigantic beast was incomparably compatible with the laws around it. It was as if this was its divine kingdom, and it was the master of this world. Donati's naturally became an invader that trespassed into its divine kingdom. Even Ale wouldn't be willing to actively invade the war god's divine kingdom. That would mean endless trouble and tremendous losses. For Donati's, if the war god had previously been a slightly troublesome opponent, now it was likely that the war god was a slightly dangerous opponent. Roland chuckled as he saw how the Chaos War god was becoming more and more cautious. Let me reintroduce myself. I'm the Hell King of the 7 Infernos of Hades. I'm the first Hell, the Blood Purgatory. I'm the executioner of the Massacre Punishment. I'm the War Dog of Hades, the War Dog of Wrath, Bustian. The War Dog of Wrath was the first to shout out his name. He was no longer able to suppress his rage, so he started attacking. Of his 3 heads, one spat out flames, one spat out ice, and the last one had the aura of death as he started biting and tearing. Even though he was facing a Chaos main god, the War Dog of Wrath still chose to initiate a fight. A vile stench and poisonous mist spread everywhere. Hell's flames were powerful enough to burn souls. Even a god would tremble when facing the War Dog of Wrath's charge. However, the War Dog of Wrath was no ordinary god. Before the War God of Wrath's gigantic beast even got close, Wrath's heavy sword's brilliance directly tore through space. Wrath's heavy sword sliced through space, leaving thin, flashing lines that constantly cut through space. The void behind the spatial tear was faintly visible, but the next instant, the entire spatial tear was repaired. So what if you're a powerful god? I've already killed countless souls with my sword. Wrath's heavy sword tore through space as the war god of Wrath's body suddenly fell down, creating a large crater in the ground as he crushed countless souls that were fighting each other. As expected of the undefeatable Chaos War God. But you'd better not underestimate my little, it's Bastian. The war dog of wrath, which had already been reduced to pieces, roared angrily. The next instant, the war dog of wrath stood up once again, but this time, he was even taller than before. His power level had also increased by nearly 10%. The war dog of wrath was furiously twitching. His already ridiculously large muscles became even thicker. Even the hellfire around his limbs became even fiercer. Wrath would make the war dog of wrath even stronger. And, the dead in the hell of Hades would never be able to die again. This was the same rule that applied to the gods of Hades. In the hell of Hades, how could the god of Hades, who was already dead, possibly die again? If Donates couldn't find a way to deal with this, Bastian's anger would only grow larger and larger. Donates, the Chaos War god, who primarily focused on physical attacks, seemed to have met the most difficult opponent in the world to deal with. The next instant, the war dog of wrath charged at Donates yet again. This time, although he was much larger than before, his movements were much more agile. The war dog of wrath unhesitatingly continued to attack Donates. Perhaps the result would still be the same this time, but what about 10 times, 100 times, or even 1,000 times? Perhaps even the Chaos Abyss War God would fall one day. Chaos War God. P2E. Don't remove the reputation that you obtained through slaughter. You're just a butcher and a vicious dog just like me. Come, let us fight to our heart's content. Chapter 457. People often said that the world was like a game of chess. But if Aish's situation was compared to a game of chess, then it would definitely be a hopeless deadlock. Not resisting would mean destruction. Resisting would mean destruction. Losing the holy war would mean destruction. Winning the holy war would mean destruction. Even if Roland wanted to escape, he wouldn't know which direction to escape to. When the existences that would bring about destruction were the superiors of both sides, this joke was so vile that nobody could laugh at it. Is there no way out? Obviously, there was no way out in the world of Aishi. This wasn't a guess at all, but rather an inference based on reality. As the destroyers, the two major factions were the true rulers of this world. Since Roland's opponents were the two major factions that controlled the greatest amount of resources and top-level combat strength, Aishi had no chance of winning on their home turf. This was no different from going against the game's GM, administrator, in the game world. It was incredibly foolish. If it wasn't for the fact that the two administrators had already lost most of their god privileges due to fighting each other, perhaps they wouldn't even have the chance to resist. I can't accept this. I really can't accept this. After working so hard and sacrificing everything, this is still the end result. If Roland had been a native of Aishi, even if he had a language and a cheat, he would probably have only been able to shake his head and helplessly give up in the face of such a situation. After all, in this world where gods truly existed, the myth of the creator goddess was deeply rooted in everyone's hearts. It would be incredibly difficult to have a child defy their parents' arrangements and have a creation oppose the creator's decision, not to mention the basically zero chance of success. However, Roland's identity as a transmigrator gave him the greatest ability to think in reverse, allowing him to find a way out in a situation where there was no way out. Since it's impossible in the world of Aishi, perhaps it's possible if I create another world. At the very least, I can create an arc to escape. That's right, this was how the Ark of Hades plan came about. At first, it was only an ark used to transport fire seeds to escape from being hunted down. Only after accumulating enough chips did the Hades plan become feasible. Of course, if he discovered that the Hades plan still had no chance of success, Roland would unhesitatingly restart the Ark plan. Honor. Honor. What's the meaning of honor when there are billions of corpses and ruins? Kids, don't be stupid at such a young age. We're just a bunch of pitiful worms struggling between life and death. In order to survive, we can do anything. Although Roland said that there was no path of retreat, he had been preparing a path of retreat from the very start. In his plan B that he didn't want to be abandoned by order, the Hell of the Hades would become a floating dimensional arc. Perhaps there would never be a day where it would return to the endless void, but at the very least, It would be able to take away the seeds of various species and precious people. That was why I had attempted to create a new world in the Earth elemental plane. This was a demonstration of my trump card. Even though it was far away in the remote Earth elemental plane, the chances of being discovered by the two major factions were quite low. Ale had personally acted to prevent any possibility of information leaking out. In fact, even the duel with Embark was a rehearsal. I used Frigid Winter Earth to cut off Amdarokan's connection to the Earth elemental plane. I used a weapon from another world that didn't exist in the world of Aishi to defeat the undefeatable Earth elemental god. Does this sound familiar? That's right, the current Hell of the Hades was also a battlefield. The Hades had cut off the main god's connection to their own planes and Aishi's world. The Hades' unique dimensional laws and magical beasts would become weapons to resist the main gods. No matter if you looked at the foundational principles of strategy, or how we chose to fight, this battle was nothing more than an upgraded version of the previous battle. And if this battle escalated even further, cut off the connection between the creator goddesses and Aishi, take away their cheating devices, and use a human wave attack to kill them. Back in the day, Roland had made such an arrogant claim. But as his power level increased, he became less and less confident. But if he could kill off one or two main gods here, compared to the plan A that would delay the creator goddess's awakening, the plan C that would take care of everything would doubtlessly be the best option. What was plan C? It was quite obvious that it was the god-slaying plan that the system had secretly blacklisted. I had paid countless prices and used more than 100 years of planning. I had slowly accumulated all sorts of advantageous chess pieces from a dead-end situation. Finally, it was time to see the results. It could be said that the situation on the battlefield would directly determine the fate of the entire world. The Hades had already been cut off, and the cycle of reincarnation was beginning to activate, giving this new plane endless power. This new plane was constantly expanding in size. And in the core of the Hell of the Hades, the seven hells of hell, the battle between the Hell Kings and the main gods was currently taking place. Hell Kings. The new Hell of the Hades was divided into the 4 pillars, 4 halls, and 7 hells. The pillars referred to the pillars, as well as the rulers of the Hell of the Hades. The 4 halls referred to the operating system of the entire Hell of the Hades. As for the 7 hells, they naturally referred to the hell's punishment that souls would suffer after death. And the rulers of the hells were the 7 original sins, the current 7 hells of hell. If one viewed hell as a mortal plane just like Ike, then hell perfectly fit the definition of a mortal plane. It was an independent mortal plane, ruled over all planes, and constructed from the 4 elements. The 7 lords of hell were existences that had the power of a powerful god's dimensional laws. Plus, they had the power of the various hells, which meant that hell had the power to fight against a main god. That was because main gods were above powerful gods. It's not looking good. Just like how the difference between semigods was infinitely large, this was because there was no longer any standard to evaluate the power level above semigod. The main gods, who had accumulated countless years and countless lives, had long since broken away from the normal evaluation system. They seemed to be only one step away from the powerful gods, but that was actually because there were far too few main gods, so there was no need to rank them. The Chaos War god originally didn't even have a divine concept related to war. Even though he was an evil god of chaos, he didn't need any belief. It was only because of his strength and battle achievements, as well as his undefeated past, that he attracted the fallen warriors who worshipped the strong. That was how the first evil god church was created. Most demon main gods were like this as well. No matter what the reason was, they had all fought and killed each other from the lowest level of demons to where they were today. To use a modern saying, they were those who achieved their Tao through strength. It was precisely because of this that the sufficiently powerful demon main gods were able to break free from the Chaos Abyss's shackles and interact with each other as equals. Actually, the great majority of main god-level existences had reached the peak step by step in this manner. The elf main god was also the strongest elf king, while the mage god himself was the strongest mage and scholar in the world. Powerful individuals were typically pure and stubborn. Although the power of belief would be beneficial to them, it would also be mixed with too many things, which would make the gains more than the losses. The god of holy light's pure power of belief was viewed as an evil path by the god of holy light. He even raised a main god of holy light in his divine kingdom who would provide him with the power of belief. The price he paid was losing his sense of self. Even if the god of holy light wasn't willing to give up his sense of self, it would be impossible for the god of holy light to maintain his sense of self without too much belief and will. And so, the source of order was naturally able to control puppets that didn't have any sense of self, just like how Roland could control Wu Mianzi. Of course, this was a secret that most gods would never know about. It wasn't easy for main gods. Countless years and the river Styx's constant cleansing had created these existences that surpassed all standards. The repeated cruel holy wars were the most practical tests for these main gods. Those who didn't meet the standards had all been eliminated. Those who were able to survive until now were all top-level existences in Aish's mortal plane. 368 times. This number was the number of times Bustling the angry war god had died in just over an hour. Yet, war god Donates didn't even seem to be panting. The angry war god Bustling had already grown more than 10 times its original size. His strength had even increased by more than 100 times. His gigantic body was now easily capable of stepping on Donates. Yet, for the Chaos War god who was slashing at Bustling with his sword, it was nothing more than one sword strike instead of two. Since dimensional tiers had been slashed open far too many times, it would take several times longer for dimensional tiers to repair. Donates didn't hesitate at all. He simply swung his sword repeatedly. Pure brute force was an undefeatable existence. So strong. Is this the strongest warrior? An existence that's undefeatable in direct combat. I had already learned just how powerful main gods were from Ale and the Devil Lords. My goal in this battle wasn't to kill all the main gods. I would be satisfied as long as I was able to kill one or two main gods. As for the rest, I would be able to accept a prolonged battle. After all, it was quite common for gods to fight for several hundred years. It wouldn't be strange for main gods to fight for as long as they could. For main gods, several years would pass in the blink of an eye. By that time, the Hades would have fully matured and their dimensional walls would be completed. If I can kill 2 main gods, I'll carry out the God-slaying plan, Plan C. If I can't kill 2 main gods, I'll carry out the Sleeping Beauty plan, Plan A, and have them sleep until the end of the world. However, the 7 Hell Lords weren't in a good situation. Even though they had undying bodies, it could be said that apart from a few, the 7 Hell Lords were at a disadvantage. Even though the 7 Hell Lords were the rulers of the 7 Hell Lords, they were only new powerful gods. Their dimensions hadn't even matured yet, so their dimensional laws naturally wouldn't be as powerful as the veteran gods. They would be far weaker than main gods. The main gods weren't easy to deal with either. Since they were willing to fight against undying opponents, it naturally wouldn't be a waste of time. Analyzing the dimensional laws of this world would require time as well. Once all the dimensional laws were analyzed, the main gods would naturally know what they needed to do. The dimensional laws of this world weren't that difficult to deal with. I was the creator of the dimensional designs, but the true builders were the elemental towers. The 4 elemental towers were constantly replenishing and strengthening this world. For the main gods, destroying all of the elemental towers would naturally mean nothing. And right now, the protective dimensional walls of the dimensional egg had already disappeared, so the elemental towers were no longer invincible. The Holy Light's Tower of Salvation was also the dimensional door between the world of the living and the world of the dead. Naturally, it was located at the highest level of the Hell of the Hades. That was the place closest to the Heaven of the Hades and the Land of Spring. There were incredibly special guards guarding that place, so I wasn't worried at all. The Judgment Tower, which represented law, was located in the depths of the Hell, where the river Styx originated. That was where the dead were judged, but it was also connected to the 7 Hells and the 4 Halls. It was the core of the entire Hades, as well as the most dangerous location. The Tower of Ice, which represented life of ice, was located in the 3rd Hell of the Hades, the Hell of Ice. It could be said that if the Tower of Ice was lost, there would be a serious problem, and both towers would be threatened. The guardian of the Tower of Ice was me, who was also the third Hell Lord. The main god who was brought here was my idiotic younger brother. The Tower of Death, which represented death and the foundation of the Hades, was something that he didn't need to worry about at all. That was because even I didn't know where he was. The Black Tower had already vanished without a trace with Ael's skeleton and soul crystals. However, it was definitely within the Hades. Now that the other 3 towers had been destroyed, it would be impossible for the Black Tower to hide again since it would be difficult to do so alone. That bug-like ability that allowed me to teleport my enemies would be impossible to use again. That was because it wasn't teleportation to begin with. It was simply a power that defined the location of the 7 hells as the location of the 7 hells. Now that the Hades had already taken shape, it was naturally impossible to use it again. In the end, everything would still be determined by power. Roland, I recalled a classic anime that you remember from deep within your memories, Saint Seiya Hades. Now that you mention it, I remember it as well. The war between the gods and the Hades. It really does seem like it, but it's far too ancient. Who would remember something from more than 300 years ago? What was the final ending? Did justice win? I just recently re-watched this anime. Since it's a shonen manga, of course it's the classic story of justice winning. That's wonderful. At the very least, it's a good omen. But the problem is that we're on the side of the Hades. In the anime, we're the antagonists. We're the ones being pushed. The goddess's warrior has won. I instantly felt rather helpless. I recalled that in that anime, both Hell God and Death God had been pushed down by the goddess's subordinates. Hell God had even been personally stabbed in the back by the goddess herself. This seemed rather cruel. Don't jinx it. There's no other anime like this. There is. It's also Saint Seiya. What? I've forgotten all about it. Poseidon chapter. Don't try to fool me. There's no Death God or Hell God in that anime. But there's a pillar. There's also 7, there's also 7 generals guarding the gate. They're the same as us, although all the generals were pushed down and the pillars collapsed. Can't you say something nice? Do you have any gillies? Yep, the goddess is with you. Go, undying cockroach. The style this time is correct, isn't it? I'm no abnormal creature like a hot-blooded cockroach. An existence that's half dead in the first round and full of HP in the next round is far too illogical. But you're undying, and you have a goddess with you. Oh, so you're the legendary main character, Star, say this name, and after this battle, I'll take you to see the gorillas. Yep, bring Beifong along as well. You know what you'll see. Don't be blind, don't be a monster. I fell completely silent. Alright then. Even the goddess of creation was afraid of this name. So he was the true main character here. However, this silence didn't last for long. Is this a date invitation? You're even bringing a gay friend? I didn't know you were so shy. Alright then, it was my turn to be rendered speechless. Just what did I do? Give me back the legendary noble, elegant, gentle, and cute mother goddess. Chapter 458. There was no sunlight in the depths of the Hades, but you didn't have to worry about not being able to see your surroundings. After all, the dead didn't use their eyes to observe external objects. The true eyes of the souls could reflect the truth of everything, even if there was no light in front of them. In this pitch-black world, if you closed your eyes and opened your heart, the entire world would reveal its true face to you, shocking even visitors from other dimensions. At every moment, this dark land without sunlight was trembling. However, it wasn't because the sky was falling and the earth was cracking. Instead, it was a rhythm full of vitality. It was like a sleeping giant beast, and the rhythm of the earth's trembling was its breathing and heartbeat. Yes, this world was alive. It was breathing, moving, and growing. The first to step through the gate of the Hades was the endless river Styx, which flowed from the shadows of the void like water from heaven. Countless newborn souls drifted helplessly in the river. This was the origin of new reincarnation. At a bend in the river, the rapid flow of the river Styx suddenly stopped. There was a shoal covered in snow. Countless demons were busily working by the shoal. They waved their pitchforks and maces, driving the unconscious souls onto the shore. Who am I? Where am I? I'm John, A militia from Katy village. I should have been killed by the beast men while I was patrolling. At the same time that he recovered his memories, the wound on his chest appeared. At the same time, there was also the arrow that pierced his body, constantly reminding him of the reality that he was already dead. However, the bestowal of the rules of the Hades allowed the souls that had lost their memories and self to return to their previous state. In the middle of the river Styx, the falling snow would cover their bodies. The newly formed bodies made of ice and snow would feel hunger, pain, and desire. Under the command of the demon soldiers, they would walk on the winding mountain path towards the palace in the mountains to welcome the final judgment that was destined to come. At the end of the mountain path, there was a wide obsidian gate with blurry words written on it. Behind the gate was a wide group of palaces. To walk towards those palaces, one had to first walk through a corridor made of mirrors. Hardedef walked along the corridor, but the reflection in the mirror was not his current appearance. It was the past, the present, and possibly the future. The one on the left was the one who played around with chickens and dogs when he was young, while the one on the right was the one who turned over a new leaf and became a militia, finding meaning in helping others. This was a famous product of hell in the future, the corridor of fate of good and evil. Here, the magic mirror that played with fate would pluck the strings of fate, and all sins and good karma would be displayed. And at the end of the corridor of mirrors was the first of the 4 halls of hell, the executor of good and evil karma on a scale, the balance hall. Upon entering the balance hall, one would discover that it was not a palace, but a boundless world. The brightly lit hall was filled with busy people, and the floor was carved with the Milky Way of fate. Devils were hurriedly working, and countless mirrors of fate kept flashing. Just memorizing the major events of the deceased as evidence for their judgment was enough to keep these novices busy. At this moment, the original god of fate, Cassio, who should have been in control of this hall, was currently in an eternal slumber. He was currently being transformed by the laws of the Hades, and when he woke up, the divine concepts of good and evil balance and accusation would be added to the balance hall. The balance hall would finally welcome its true master. While Cassio was in a deep sleep, the silver-robed judge was busy at the position where he should have been sitting. Not only that, in the 3 halls that had already been activated but weren't guarded by the gods, the silver-robed figure was also busy at the manager's position. You're doing so many jobs by yourself. Can you even ask for overtime pay? You're the final boss. Who can you ask for overtime pay from? Right now, the reason why I had the free time to comment to my system was because I, as the master of the Hades, had obtained some new abilities. The reason why I had the free time to chat was because I was now capable of having countless incarnations. It was quite a wondrous feeling to be able to simultaneously observe so many locations. Even more wondrous was that I could stand on the bodies of all the original sins and taunt the main gods without having to worry about being reduced to dust. Oh my, Donates is so violent. He killed yet another incarnation. Yep, it should be said that it wouldn't matter even if he was reduced to dust. And so, as if I was playing a strategy game, I sent another incarnation over to continue provoking Donates with words to interfere with their judgment and gather information. The current me was Wumianzi Roland, the pillar of space, one of the 4 pillars of hell. I existed in the balance hall, as well as in the 7 hells. I was the Hades, and the Hades were me. Endless incarnations was my most useful yet most useless special ability. After all, these incarnations had 0 combat strength to speak of, but they allowed me to do many things. From a different perspective, unless both the pillar of law and the pillar of death collapsed, I would be undying. This was one of the special abilities that I had just obtained. Actually, as long as the pillar of death didn't collapse, the gods of the Hades would all be undying. Or, to put it more directly, how could the already dead existences in the Hades possibly die again? The gods of the Hades had to be dead. If they were alive, they would become dead the moment they chose to become a member of the Hades. As for the 4 pillar gods, they had to be reborn from the dead. They had to be the purest dead born in this world in order to become the 4 pillars of the Hades. This was the foundational rule of the Earth elemental plane. For example, only elemental life forms could become elemental gods, and only dead gods could become the gods of the kingdom of the dead. Yep, There was no need to hide anything at this time. I was already dead, and a bento. When I used Reverse God's Descent to infuse my soul into Wumianzi's body, allowing my physical body to merge with my divine body, my physical body was corroded by the aura of the Hades. My original physical body had already sunk into a physiological state of eternal hibernation. The natural laws of the earth elemental plane didn't differentiate between friend and foe. At that moment, I was already biologically dead. Actually, I was already destined to die from the moment I entered the Hades. What? Not shocking enough. Too sudden. Who made the rule that a bento had to be slowly brewed up in several episodes, or that it had to be emotional and tearful? I was already used to receiving bento. Receiving and vomiting bento over and over again would make me feel nauseous. Since this was already my 5th bento, there was no need to be so unreasonable. So many people have already died. It doesn't matter if I die. Fortunately, Wumianzi was Sloth, a unique undead created from splitting off his soul. He completely fit the definition of a dead person and could directly merge with his current physical body. Otherwise, I would have had to first die in the mortal plane and then fill up my soul crystal. I didn't even know how long it would take for me to wake up, or if I could even wake up. It was likely that no one would be in charge of the construction of the Hades. Now that I had mastered the power of space in the Hades, I also had the ability to transform into a myriad of clones. This was a special ability that the god of judgment, Wumianzi, needed. Otherwise, just the endless undead judgment alone would be enough to tire him to death. Right now, this ability was the most convenient one for me. It allowed me to control the entire situation and have a bird's-eye view of the battlefield. I would also be able to fill in the gaps in time. More importantly, this ability to transform into clones would allow me to carry out my official duties in place of my comrades who were currently in a deep sleep, changing, assimilating, and carrying out the cycle of Hades. As long as the Hades were carrying out their duties and allowing the cycle of reincarnation to continue, not only would the Hades themselves become more complete and powerful, even the gods, warriors, and guards of the Hades would become stronger. This would be our support and source of power for a prolonged battle, as well as the key to victory that Ale had fought for us. Every time the Lord of Hades created a dossier of criminals, the sleeping Cassio would obtain a portion of power, which would bring him one step closer to true awakening. And with every judgment, every cycle of reincarnation, and every time the law was carried out, I, as the Lord of Hades, the Lord of Law, and the God of Judgment, would naturally obtain a portion of power as well. Even the 7 kings of hell would naturally become stronger when those condemned were thrown into the infernos and their duties were carried out. Since the Ale plane had been able to produce more than 100 main gods in its entire history, there were currently more than 20 of them, which meant that there were main gods even at the beginning of creation. Our Hades plane would naturally be able to produce main god-level existences as well. At this time, the bargaining chip that I had promised to a certain existence was naturally revealed. Anything that could be used to bribe powerful individuals would naturally require greater power and a higher status. The 7th Hell's bestial desires purgatory was where Lust Share was stationed. Her opponent was also a main god-level existence, Sophocles the Deceiver. Share herself didn't have any powerful combat strength. She could only rely on the Hell Dragons under her command. And, the 7th Hell was where the Hell Dragons gathered. Yes, the Hell Dragons were a completely new species. They were the future envoys of the Hades, as well as the only existences that could freely enter and exit the Hades. Compared to the past, their bodies were much larger, and their dragon scales had become pitch black. However, nobody would mistake them for black dragons. The aura of death that filled the air around them was the foundational difference between them and ordinary dragons. Being able to travel through dimensions and not be affected by the environment was the strongest special ability of dragons to begin with. Meanwhile, the Hell Dragons of the Hades were capable of wandering between life and death. They would become the death gods and hell gods who traveled on land. As for their combat strength, it would be incomparable to what they had been in the past. I know that all dragons desire power. What I can give you is naturally endless power and the glory of being the ruler of a dimension. That's a power that's more than enough to kill even gods. You shall become the strongest dragon king. Your brethren shall become the strongest dragons. And so, the white dragon Sam consulted Roland's plan and confirmed that the reward was feasible. In order to change the fate of the white dragons, he joined Roland's faction, and the entire white dragon species became the Hell Dragons. However, he wasn't the most powerful dragons of the Hades. The true ruler of the Hades was the three-headed hell dragon Evelyn, who was currently fighting against the demon main god Sophocles the Deceiver. Apart from helping to heal Cher, don't you want to have your own home and brethren? Of course, you'll also receive additional power and the status of the ruler of a dimension. You'll be 100 times more glorious than you are now. There were two hell dragon leaders. One of them was the former supreme immemorial white dragon Sam, while the other was the three-headed hell dragon Evelyn and her younger sisters. Currently, the main god Sophocles the Deceiver was actually at a disadvantage under the combined attacks of the hell dragons. Chapter 459. The creator goddess's power was limitless. Creating a world would bring about additional powers and abilities that could create events, distort karma and time, create main gods, and create new species. The creator goddess's power was also limited. No matter how excellent her parents were or how strict her family's laws were, it would be impossible for her to control her children's achievements and growth. Even the creator goddess herself didn't know what she would become in the end. The Titan giants had been inconceivably powerful back in the day because the creator goddess had given them the power and ability to create. However, the Titan giants' original goal was for them to become the top craftsmen and artists. The demons that had been given the natural talents of evolution and combat were supposed to be the most outstanding warriors and dimensional guardians, but they ended up like that. Parents would only be able to give their children direction of growth. The creator goddess was slightly stronger and would be able to give them direction and natural talents as gifts. But what they would become in the end, whether or not their natural talents would be fermented into actual abilities, and what level an individual or species would reach would all depend on the individual species' development and how hard they worked. Nobody would know beforehand. Roland had given the Hell Dragons the power and responsibility of being the emissaries of the Hades. Just like how Hell Dragons would borrow the natural talents of dragons that had transmigrated to other dimensions to become the representative of the Chaos Abyss in the mortal plane, the Hell Dragons of the Hades would also become the messengers and representatives of the Death Gods and Hell Gods. And in order to fulfill this responsibility, the Hades plane gave the Hell Dragons the power to spread death. This was why the Hell Dragons would soon be called representatives of death, Hell Gods of the Dead, and Dragons of Death. The Hell Dragons had curvaceous bodies that were even stronger than ordinary red dragons. Their translucent night wings made them seem like drifting nightmares. Pitch-black mist surrounded them, and only their blood-red eyes shone with an abnormal light. This mist was actually a form of protection for others. As the incarnation of death, any weak life form in the mortal plane that saw the Hell Dragons' true bodies would likely instantly die. A large number of Hell Dragons surrounded the powerful Demon Lord and occasionally unleashed dragon breath attacks. Judging from the appearance of this slow black mist ball breath, it didn't seem as domineering as the Thunderflame dragon breath. However, only Sophocles himself knew that this Hell Dragon breath was far more dangerous and vicious than any other dragon breath. The law of death and the ability to die instantly. Looks like I've suffered a loss this time. The main gods were able to resist the invasion of the rule of death in the Hades by relying on their outstanding individual abilities. They had long been accustomed to fighting against the hostile plane laws, but it did not mean that they could ignore the power of the rule that invaded their bodies, especially when the power of the rule itself represented death. If an ordinary life form was corroded by this death aura, they would directly enter the Hades. Even if it was a main god, if they did not want to be corroded by the laws of the Hades and stay here forever, they should not take too much damage. With every attack, the deathly hell aura would connect to the Demon King's body like bone-covering flames. The Demon King's gigantic body became the best target, and the all-pervasive hell aura was transforming the Demon King into a demon lord. Sophocles the Deceiver was a demon who was the closest demon to the devils. He was only willing to help out because of the excellent conditions that Cynthia had offered him. The most valuable reward that the Chaos Abyss could offer was dimensional territory. A rich dimensional territory would mean tangible power and wealth, as well as an endless supply of souls. What would be the point of all this if he was bound to this dimensional territory and became the same species as his old nemesis? Even after fighting for so long, Sophocles had only been corroded to 1%. He was still far from being bound, but he was already spending most of his energy on dodging and defending. It was quite obvious that he was only doing his job and not doing his best. Safety was his number one priority. However, every time Sophocles counterattacked, no matter if it was a natural magical or physical attack, a hell dragon would howl in pain and fall from the sky. This made Sam's heart ache. After all, most of the hell dragons here were his descendants, as well as his future kin. Yes, the hell dragons didn't have undying bodies. There would always be losses for every gain. Since the hell dragons had the special ability to leave the Hades, how could they possibly have the undying bodies unique to the Hades? As the messengers of the Hades, the hell dragons were born with the ability to summon and control undead souls. Large numbers of undead souls with undying bodies were summoned to attack Sophocles. What other place would have more powerful undead souls than the Hades? However, Sophocles was no idiot. When he discovered that these undead had low attack power, compared to a main god, and undying bodies, he unhesitatingly ignored his enemies and focused his attention on the hell dragons instead. In terms of direct combat strength, Sophocles was probably the weakest among the main gods as he was skilled at scheming. However, he was still a main god-level demon main god with far superior combat strength. If it weren't for the fact that Sophocles had so many misgivings, he wouldn't have been suppressed so easily. When I focused most of my attention on Sophocles, I was pleasantly surprised to see the hell dragon's unexpected performance. Originally, I had considered that Cher wasn't skilled at direct combat, so I had assigned her the weakest main god and even had the hell dragons help her out. However, I never expected that the hell dragons would be so outstanding that they actually forced Sophocles into a passive state. Of course, if this battle continued, either the hell dragons would be unable to handle the losses and collapse, or Sophocles would be forced into a corner and reveal his true demonic nature, causing him to go on a killing spree. I didn't believe that these newborn hell dragons would truly be able to corrupt this main god. Perhaps we can have a chat. My voice reverberated in the empty space as the demon lord increased the intensity of his attacks. He suddenly tossed a magic spear through the air, directly striking down a giant dragon that was circling in the air. Then, he used the chain at the end of the spear to drag the dragon down and swallowed it in one gulp. As he chewed, he glared at me with his dim yellow eyes. All of this happened the instant that I opened my mouth. I didn't even have time to save him. You! Sam roared angrily. However, he didn't counterattack for revenge. He was also a veteran. After his anger subsided, he instantly realized that he was innocent. The demon main god wasn't doing this because he was vicious by nature. Rather, it was because he seemed to be unafraid of continuing to fight. And, this just happened to be the most powerful bargaining chip in a negotiation. This meant that the demon main god indeed wanted to negotiate. And, if he continued to fight, the newborn hell dragons would suffer heavy losses. I shook my head. If Sam had charged forward, I would have actually thought more highly of him. Fight for me again, my servant. I pointed at the dragon corpses on the ground, causing them to be corroded by hell energy and transformed into ghost dragons and bone dragons. The ice and Hades gave them even stronger physical bodies. The ghost dragons raised their heads and roared angrily, greatly boosting the hell dragon's morale. What could possibly be more reassuring than having a hell god standing behind you? Death wasn't the end. One more chance would be far more powerful than any reinforcements. Of course, the ghost dragons also lost most of the hell dragon's abilities and the special ability to escape from the Hades. However, this technique of mine gave Sophocles a lot of pressure. If these hell dragons ignored their own lives and continued to corrode his physical body, it was likely that he would forever be trapped here. Perhaps we can have a chat. I slowly nodded. Although I appeared cold, I was actually quite satisfied. Wasn't the purpose of splitting up the enemy in order to obtain an opportunity to split up, bribe, and destroy the enemy? How much willpower could the hell dragons possibly have when they were no longer under the dimensional will's supervision? This was especially true when I had enough bargaining chips to bribe the enemy. As long as I could achieve some results in my negotiation, Even if the Hell Dragons were willing to remain verbally neutral, I would be able to use a portion of the Hell Dragon's combat strength to deal with the other Hell Dragons. The final advantage would snowball like a rolling snowball. I could only obtain the final victory. Otherwise, even if I killed the Hell Dragons, it would still be doubtful how much I would gain. From the very start, my biggest goal in splitting up the Hell Dragons was to obtain an opportunity to have a chat. Of the 7 main gods, only 2 were willing to have a chat with me. I didn't see any possibility of negotiating with the other 5. That was why the same thing was happening on another battlefield. In the 4th Hell's boundless greed, Harlois was currently facing the God of Wisdom. However, she was all smiles as she chatted with the Hell Lord, drinking tea, and playing chess. She had no intention of fighting at all. The reason? Actually, it had to do with Harlois's identity. She was a descendant of the Gold Elves, the only true descendant of the Gold Elves. Meanwhile, the God of Wisdom, Calamanders, was a half-elf. Considering his ancient birth, it was obvious that he lived in an era when the Gold Elves were in power. Half of his bloodline came from the Halitdam generation, while the other half came from the low-level Wild Elves. The Wild Elves gave him endless knowledge and memories. Although the Wild Elves treated him with great hostility, he managed to avoid the destruction of the Halitdam generation. It was said that the Gold Elf Emperor of the Gold Elves had done much to help Calamanders avoid being hunted down by the main gods. The reason he used was that Calamanders was a member of the Gold Elves. As for whether it was because of true friendship or for the sake of the Halitdam generation's technology, I didn't know for now. But at the very least, the God of Wisdom did indeed owe the Gold Elves a favor. Alright then, I admit that I had heard this rumor from Harlois. This God of Wisdom, and books had indeed secretly taken care of Harlois in the past to repay the Elven Emperor's favor. Otherwise, the elf main gods would have long since eradicated Harlois. How could they possibly allow Harlois, who was a descendant of the Gold Elves, to be so active in the mortal plane and cause so much trouble? Of course, as the price, the God of Wisdom wouldn't possibly give Harlois too much help. When Harlois told me about their relationship and asked to communicate with Calamanders of her own volition, I was quite delighted. Having a good personal relationship was doubtlessly the best way to start a negotiation. Perhaps we can have a discussion. And so, another Wumianzi incarnation appeared in front of the God of Wisdom and Harlois. This time, I did my best to force out a smile. However, Wumianzi's first sentence was already quite unexpected. Negotiate. Of course, that's exactly what I'm here for. But first, let me meet with my people who also come from the Halitdam generation. Chapter 460. Not every main god-level existence could be reasoned with. Many powerful existences would never reason with the weak. Or, to be more direct, they didn't even treat the weak as existences they could communicate with. In the beginning, demons weren't actually evil. Back when I was on the river Styx, Aeless words rang in my ears, but I couldn't use them as a reference. After all, in Aesha's dimension, demons had long since become infamous. Is being weak a sin? If it was any other species, they might be able to discuss the relationship between life philosophy and social reality with you. At the very least, they would give you an acceptable answer, such as the weak need to be protected by the strong. But for demons, they would use their actions to tell you, the weak? Of course they'll only become food and toys. In the world of demons, the strong preyed on the weak. Being weak was an even greater sin. Only possessing wealth without the power to protect it was basically a shortcut to death. There were only 2 paths in a demon's life. One would become stronger, or one would accidentally fall and become food or a stepping stone for other demons. And for main god-level demons, it would be nearly impossible to advance any further. That was because the will of the Chaos Abyss would always be above them. Although they were able to break free from part of her control, as long as they continued living in the chaotic Chaos Abyss, it would be impossible for them to completely break free from her control. At this moment, the dimensional invaders from the Chaos faction discovered what was truly special about this dimension after a short moment of confusion. This wasn't another dimension derived from the Aeshi plane. This was a newly created mortal plane, and for the Chaos faction, A newly created mortal plane would be like a piece of super juicy meat. A newly created mortal plane would be a rare opportunity that would only appear once in tens of thousands of years. Just obtaining a portion of an ordinary plane's resources and natural laws would allow them to become even more powerful. A complete mortal plane would be their only chance to surpass their eternal master after countless years. That's right, there wasn't a single demon who didn't want to become even more powerful. Devouring and evolving had already become their law of survival. As long as there was a chance, how could they not rebel? No matter what the final negotiation with Sophocles the Deceiver was, my best hope was that he would temporarily remain neutral. As for the other demon main gods, there wasn't even a need to try. But there was one who was special, and that was my foolish younger brother. What? Nothing much, I just wanted to say, a certain older brother who had already finished his classic line couldn't continue speaking. After all, what followed after was ridicule. You're still too weak, live on in an ugly way. It seemed that he was the one who was weaker now. If Cavendish learned from a certain younger brother and taunted me right from the start, then attacked me right away, I would most likely be sent flying with a single slap. Even if I wouldn't die, it would still be too embarrassing. I tossed Wu Mianzi's mask to the side. Cavendish was still cooking his fish, but I had come in my true form. After all, demons were already quite difficult to deal with. Adding on Cavendish, this was definitely the worst possible combination. I had never underestimated Cavendish. Ever since he was young, he had never liked to use his brain. He liked to be straightforward, but it was not that he was stupid. On the contrary, he had his own way of doing things and attitude. If we can solve it with our fists, why use our brains? If we think too much, our movements will slow down. Actions were faster than thoughts. He used his physical body to learn through practical combat. He grew at a high speed, but he didn't lack any foundational knowledge. He had a straightforward appearance that far surpassed his age, yet he still had the hot-bloodedness of a youth. He was sly when he needed to be, and he always unknowingly obtained the love of others and people. Fine then, I admit that he was slightly more popular with women than I was. Just say what you want to say. Fine, not just a little, but a lot, alright? Based on the number of spouses I've already obtained, the multiplier is probably several tens of thousands of times. Alright, I shouldn't have commented on you like this. No, since your base number is 0, the answer should be infinity. Alright, goddess of order, thank you for your accurate calculations, but please shut up for now. Getting back to the main topic, Cavendish had always been quite popular compared to me, who was often absent from Defender. His military achievements against the demon abyss had also earned him the recognition of the military. If it wasn't for that incident, Cavendish would have been the best ruler in the Mist Kingdom, as I had planned to be a holy knight for the rest of my life. I wasn't dissatisfied with such a life at all, although I would sometimes complain about it. Yep, I was quite envious of him. Just like how people who thought too much would sometimes envy those who were pure and happy, they would always unknowingly grow up and obtain the trust and approval of others as they grew up, finally achieving success. You have to work so hard in order to achieve what you want, but he can suddenly achieve something similar on a whim, and is always able to receive the love and attention of his parents and friends. Even if you do better than him, this is so unfair. Do you think that bad boys always receive more attention? It seems that I should learn to be bad as well. When I was young, I had quite a few such thoughts and made quite a few moronic jokes. However, it didn't affect the relationship between us brothers. After all, facing such a naive brat, I didn't know how to get angry even if I wanted to. Roland, what kind of condiments do you like? I have everything from the Blood Tribe's Holy Blood condiments to the Inferno Demon's Abyss condiments. I can tell just from the name that there's something wrong with it. I don't want any condiments. By the way, the battle is about to begin. Are you really that uninterested? Yep, I'm quite interested in eating fish. I spent at least 30 years preparing this pot of fish in order to successfully scam it. You don't even know how troublesome it was to fish him. I collected 7 or 8 god equipment and killed off a dozen demon lords. You're making it sound like cooking a dish to kill off a demon lord with schemes. Don't tell me that you really killed him for the sake of eating fish. Cavendish looked at me in astonishment, as if I had asked an idiotic question. Of course it's for the sake of eating. He's the largest fish in the entire universe. He'll definitely taste delicious. Otherwise, why would I bring you along to share with you? At that moment, I knew that he was telling the truth. Even though he had already entered the chaos abyss, he was still living as simply as before. I was truly envious. Yep, I was only envious, not jealous, because it was impossible to hate such a pure fellow. However, I was quite skilled at dealing with such a pure idiot. It would be useless to stop them when they were inexplicably angry. If I didn't like them, all I needed was a bit of rational ice cube. About that, I've also heard that he's one of the oldest demon lords in the chaos abyss. In other words, he's as old as a living fossil. Even fish that's 100 years old is old and astringent. Delicious. Aren't you overthinking things? And so, my hand that was stirring the pot instantly stopped. Cavendish turned around with a clattering sound. The resentment in his eyes and the "why didn't you tell me earlier" made me want to raise my head and laugh out loud. All right, I laughed loudly, laughed wildly, laughed so hard that I held my stomach, laughed so hard that tears came out. As expected, happiness has to be built on someone else's misfortune. As I wiped away my tears, I took out my gavel and codex. Since this pot of fish was about to be cooked, and since Cavendish said that fish can only be eaten if you're not dead, it was time for us to get serious. This was an annoying tacit understanding between brothers that didn't require words. But then, I suddenly stopped as I recalled a piece of information that I needed to tell you. Right, did you know about Cynthia? And about our souls? About our souls being the same person? Of course I knew about it. I knew about it before I entered the chaos abyss. Otherwise, why would I leave my frigid maw behind for you? Besides, even if I didn't know about it before, do you really think that I wouldn't understand about souls after becoming a demon? Indeed, how could Cavendish not realize that I was the first to break the record for becoming a demon main god? And souls were the eternal goal of all demons. You're still as sharp as ever. Is this your wild instincts? I'm so envious of you. You're envious of me? Ha, I'm actually quite envious of you. Envious of me? Yep, I'm not as smart as you are. You always have so many clever ideas. Nothing is too difficult for you. Back in the day, Kelly and little Sarah loved to follow you around and listen to your interesting stories. Dad also always praised you for being smart and capable. Cavendish awkwardly scratched his head as he said such embarrassing words. Ha, since I can't win against you even if I use my brain, I might as well not use it at all and just use my body's instincts. I never expected that I would get used to it. TSK, even though we're clearly two separate entities of the same soul, why can't I come up with any clever ideas? My intelligence must have been eaten away by you. To think that his familiar old face would actually blush. Hey, is this still the arrogant, fearless, and shameless human brother of mine who doesn't know the immensity of the heavens and earth? At this moment, I didn't even know what to say. Perhaps this was proof of an old saying, what you long for the most will never appear. Sigh. Finally, all my exclamations transformed into a single sigh. I took a deep breath and took a step forward, tossing all my random thoughts to the back of my mind. That was because I was only here to fight. The annoying tacit understanding between brothers let us know that since we made our own choices, there was nothing to regret. Perhaps today would be our first serious battle. Perhaps it would also be our last. This was also the reason why we brothers, who were always so awkward with each other, would say what we truly wanted. As for persuasion, how would that be possible? The only similarity between us brothers was probably our stubborn brains. I had my own ideals, while he had his own choices. Since he even knew about Cynthia's matter, and he had already reached the peak of the Chaos faction, his choices were all from his heart. Let's not insult each other with unnecessary words. How are you doing in the Chaos abyss? Ha, that's such a damned place. There's killing all day, but it's my favorite place. Yep, it's my current home. I don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. I love that damned place the most. Ha, I knew that even Cynthia wouldn't be able to control you. Your bastard personality is indeed quite suitable for the Chaos Abyss. Rebuilding Donglan and Sluware was all that Cavendish could remember about the past. The current him loved the turbid yet lively Chaos Abyss. He loved the Chaos Abyss and the lore of the jungle that Cynthia represented. He was a maniacal player who loved this world the most. As for me, I hated this cruel yet beautiful world. Our beliefs and personalities were different. After 300 years of fermentation, these two originally similar souls finally walked down completely different paths. The two brothers looked at each other and suddenly laughed together in an indescribable manner. The next instant, a silver holy war hammer viciously clashed against a dim yellow magic sword. Since we can play now, let's see whose love is deeper. Roland, please don't die. I intend to play a few more times. Roland's dim yellow eyes were filled with the joy of battle, but all he received was his older brother's ridicule as always. Ha, my foolish younger brother. *CK me, don't hit my face. The war hammer and magic sword clashed against each other, creating a fiery glow that illuminated the pitch-black depths of hell. What was illuminated were two excited and delighted faces.